Chapter 901. Mutual Damage My *SS. Although the Alliance had gathered almost all of their strongest players to fight Arthas as if he was a boss, everyone knew that they were in trouble this time. Last time, the Alliance and Horde powerhouses besieged Arthas near the Dalajan, but they did not manage to take him down. The most important reason was that Frostmourne was too overpowered. Not only was it extremely sharp, but it also healed itself, weakened the enemy's will, released Frost Aura, and many other powerful effects. Ordinary epic weapons could not do anything to Arthas. If they were to fight head-on, the weapon would be broken in one hit. This was simply a collision between a bronze sword and a steel sword. There was no solution. Otherwise, why would they have to sacrifice Orgrim? At that time, of course, it was because the Dreadlord had saved him, but ultimately, it was because the Alliance and Horde were not strong enough. But today was different. Quell, Zarum, and Ashbringer, the two artifacts, held the fort. Sidon focused on defense, and Servanas madly dealt damage. Speaking of which, the surrounding powerhouses, including Duque, did not do much from the beginning to the end. Not to mention one Dreadlord, even if half a dozen came, Duque was confident that he could hold on for more than 15 minutes. After all, not every Dreadlord was as powerful as he was. Moreover, Illidan had already gone to find trouble with the boss of the Dreadlord, Tichondrius. Therefore, there were only 3 Dreadlords who were truly qualified to effect this battle. Excluding those who were still in charge of Lordaeron, there was only one Dreadlord who could come. Moreover, the Dreadlord was following Archimonde's orders to take over the Scourge army. Under normal circumstances, no one would come to save Arthas except for the people from the Zul's line. Now was the time when the Zul's line was at its weakest. After thinking about it, the only one who would come to save the two fools was the loyal Kel Thuzad. But a Kel Thuzad wanted to save them. That was underestimating the Alliance. Almost at the same time as Jaina provoked Arthas again and sought refuge with Duque, a portal suddenly appeared less than 2 meters away from Arthas. At the same time, several huge portals the size of basketball courts appeared above everyone's heads. From inside, countless powerful undead monsters poured down as if they were free. Go, it was Kel Thuzad's voice. Arthas suddenly came to a realization. That's right. Everything was King provocation. It wasn't easy to catch him, and the Alliance couldn't wait for him to fight to the death with these musclemen. Arthas could not help but feel a surge of warmth in her heart. How ironic. Who would have thought that in the end, it wasn't the great Lich Inastrian who came to save him? Instead, it was Kel Thuzad, who he had single-handedly killed, who pulled him back at the crucial moment. Hey! I didn't waste half of the Sunwell's power to resurrect you in vain. This was what Arthas thought. The experts on the periphery, who had been idling for a long time, immediately perked up. Ha! Riadaline bellowed. The hammer and shield in her hand clashed, producing a crisp clanging sound. Even as a woman, her long experience in frontline battles made every move of hers filled with fierce pressure. Of course, she knew that she was not the main force of the assault force. In terms of long-range damage output, the nearby players completely outclassed her. Originally, Lilith pulling the bowstring 4 times in a second and firing 3 times each time was already very crazy. But compared to Ronan and Kale, who were in a human-shaped artillery formation, she was still very weak. Just as the 3 holy knights surrounded Arthas, the 2 Radiant Moon Archmages, who were second only to Breaking Dawn Archmages, quickly constructed a temporary medium-sized war magic formation. That's right, it was not a small one, but a medium-sized one. Powerful magic stones that were enough to make an ordinary Radiant Moon Archmage a lifetime's worth were inserted into the nodes of the magic formation as if they were free of charge, acting as the magic formation's auxiliary source of magic power. Almost at the same time that the elite undead monsters in the sky emerged from the teleportation portal, violent firepower shot up like countless fireworks from the ground, producing all kinds of strange sounds as they soared into the sky. It was 2 torrential magic rains that seemed to violate the laws of nature, falling from the ground to the sky. Ronan's arcane storm and Kale, that's skyrocketing fire pillar easily tore the terrifying monsters that these elite holy knights would need to spend a long time to deal with into pieces. The body parts that fell from the sky didn't even fall to the ground before they were blown up by the seemingly endless magic attacks, turning into even finer pieces. Of course. All of this was just a diversion. The focus was never on these elite undead monsters. Seeing that the cannon fodder couldn't interfere with the Alliance's hunting team, Arthas couldn't help but spit in his heart. He had to rely on himself. Unfortunately, just as he swung his sword fiercely at Mograine and Turalyon, using the terrifying evil energy to form a sword ray to avoid them and was about to step into the teleportation portal, suddenly, there was a crisp explosion from the portal in front of him. It was like the sound of a glass mirror being smashed. In Arthas's ears, this was undoubtedly the sound of destruction. Using his elemental senses, he sensed who the culprit was. Following the direction of his senses, Arthas saw an unsurprising fellow, Duke Marcus. Even though Duque seemed to be just a bystander, in reality, Duque was the key to this hunt. Without Duque, Arthas could be rescued at any time. As soon as Duque made his move, he crushed the teleportation portal that could have allowed the second fool to escape from the tragedy. Traversing tens of thousands of miles of space, sensing the location he wanted to teleport to, and then eliminating the obstacles in the spatial passageway between the teleportation portals, or directly creating a spatial passageway to avoid all the spatial cracks. Was this something a mortal could do? Absolutely impossible. Before the magic civilization had gone through a few transformations in Azeroth and then flourished, the teleportation portal was the patent of the Radiant Moon Pharaoh and above. If one wanted to use it well, one had to be at least a breaking dawn. It wasn't that Duque's spatial magic was completely superior to Kel Thuzad's, but that Duque had the advantage of being closer. At this time, it was already very impressive for human archers to be able to shoot 50 steps on flat ground. Any further and it would be useless. It was the same for magic. The further the distance, the more power was reduced. Kel Thuzad, who was still in Lordaeron, wanted to cross space to save the second fool, but did he ask Duque? Duque didn't even need to spend a lot of effort to crush Kel Thuzad's unstable teleportation portals. Arthas's entire body convulsed. He was angry. Not only was he angry at Duque for kicking him into a corner, he was also angry at Duque's actions. Chapter 902. That was because it wasn't Jaina who was hugging Duque, but Duque, who was acting righteously, was protecting Jaina. Yes, he was hugging her back with his right hand, while his wrist went under Jaina's armpit and hugged her. Although the claw seemed to be subconsciously resting on the right side of her breastplate, it looked like that bastard Duque was holding her breasts. Jaina wasn't an idiot, nor was she an ordinary woman. The ice element surrounding her body was connected to her magic circuit. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that the ice element around her was her second layer of skin. How could she not sense Duque's little action? What the hell was that she had said those harsh words? She would rather be Duque's lover than Arthas' queen. Now that your lover is here, if Arthas notices anything that you're unwilling to do, everything that you've done before will be for nothing. Jaina even began to suspect that Duque, who was a bumpkin in the eyes of other nobles, didn't understand ancient Earthy. Fine. That wasn't the point. Jaina had never rejected Duque from the beginning. Unfortunately, a woman chasing a man with a veil was a deadly veil that she couldn't pierce even after a dozen years. Furthermore, after Duque supported her in developing Theramore and promised to help her kill Archimonde on Mount Hyjal, her sincerity, which she had never truly given, seemed to be showing signs of melting. It had nothing to do with a terrible and helpless political deal. It was purely the admiration of a strong woman toward a man who was willing to support her career. It was the faint admiration of a woman toward a hero who was willing to help her take revenge. Ha! So what if I'm a lover? Even if I'm a lover, it's better than becoming the queen of an ugly undying monster. Jaina really thought that way and did it. Even though she knew that Duque was mocking Arthas and that it was likely an act, Jaina didn't mind making it real. So, she snuggled into Duque's arms with a satisfied and incomparably seductive expression. She wanted to take revenge on Arthas with her actions. That's right. It was you who summoned Archimonde, you bastard. No matter how much I hate my father, even if I can't inherit the throne because of my big brother, that's still my family's business. It's your fault that the demon you released killed my father and big brother's family. You are also my enemy. Jaina, the social butterfly in history and the movie queen of this world, played the role of a lover brilliantly. She didn't mind the existence of Servanas, who was theoretically Duque's legal wife. Her vivid expression was clearly saying, "Darling, harder, harder." The movie queen's performance provoked Arthas's anger. Very rarely, when Kel Thuzad's rescue became impossible, Arthas lost her mind. Ah! As Arthas shouted, the Frostmourne in his hands suddenly changed. The long and wide blade instantly became dark and gloomy, like the suction of a long vacuum cleaner, swallowing the dark power within an unknown radius of countless kilometers. Then, Arthas began to charge. It was a death charge that contained the strongest power he could gather. Every step he took on the ground would cause darkness within dozens of steps. Plants would wither, and all living things would wither. Mograine and Turalyon used both hands to hold the divine weapons in their hands tightly. The golden light of Ashbringer and Quell Zerum became even more dazzling and resplendent. An opponent who was enraged to the point of losing his mind was the best prey in the eyes of a hunter. But the craziness of a cornered beast meant that one mistake would cost them their lives. Every strong person's face was full of solemnity. Finally, the first attack without any fancy moves came. It was an extremely simple head-on chop. It was a posture without any technical content. Almost every warrior had practiced this chop tens of thousands of times since they were young. It was because it was simple that it was pure. Mograine could dodge, but he couldn't. Behind him were Duque and Jaina, and further away was Ronan, who was standing in the magic circle and unable to move. He could retreat, Duque and Jaina could retreat, but Ronan would definitely be out of luck. They were going to fight the Archherons soon. If possible, it was best to preserve the combat power of every strong person. Moreover, speaking of righteousness, Mograine had never been afraid of anyone after obtaining Ashbringer. In the next second, a heavy collision of light against darkness, strength against strength, shook everyone's eardrums. Bang! It wasn't the clanging sound of metal colliding, but the surging explosion of two masses of energy colliding. The entire world seemed to be divided into two halves at this moment. To the south was Mogaine's blazing light. To the north was Arthas's cold darkness. Light and darkness collided violently, bursting forth in this place. Within a radius of 100 meters, everything that had nothing to do with light and darkness was crushed into powder by the violent energy. Unfortunately, this was the decaying Fellwood forest, which was filled with the power of death and evil. In a sense, this was already half of Arthas's home ground. Mograine was very strong. His wild and pure holy light was amplified by Ashbringer, and he could suppress Arthas in terms of individual strength. However, Arthas never fought alone. Frostmourne stored the power of darkness refined from nearly 10 million vengeful spirits. Arthas, who was going all out, sent Mograine flying in a single blow. But it didn't matter. In the next moment, Turalyon had already arrived. Without giving Arthas any time to react, Quell Zerum's golden light dazzled Arthas's undead vision. Another head-on collision of light and darkness. This time, it was launched while Arthas's old strength had just dissipated, and he hadn't recovered yet. Turalyon was halfway to success. The brilliant golden light suppressed the dark light, causing Arthas to stagger and take 3 steps back. Good chance. Saidan Dathrahan seized this opportunity and pounced from behind Arthas. Arthas's rune sword had been hit to the left. In Saidan's view, this fallen prince had only 2 directions to attack. One was to take advantage of the situation and stab Frostmourne from the left, but this would hit the big shield that Arthas had prepared. The other option was to use a stronger force to pull out the sword and turn around to slash. This was certainly powerful, but the problem was that such a move would take more time. If he couldn't hit the enemy, everything would be useless. Sai-Dan also guarded against the right. But the terrifying Frostmourne stabbed from an angle that Sai-Dan never expected. It wasn't until the evil black blade pierced through the armor and muscles of his chest that he realized what had happened. Arthas pierced his abdomen with the magic sword and then stabbed him. Mortals would die together in this way, but Arthas was an undead. Chapter 903. If Sai-Dan Dathrahan had not stepped into the realm of heroes, such a tricky and mysterious attack would have killed him. As one of the strongest warriors in the human camp, Saidan's speed and reflexes were undoubtedly beyond his prime. At 33 years old, he was in the prime of a man's life. Perhaps his speed and reflexes were not as good as when he had just become a paladin. After all, he was only 18 years old. But after so many years of military life, his combat skills and awareness were undoubtedly at the peak. From the beginning of the Second World War at the Dark Portal to the second invasion led by Zul, to the repeated tug-of-war with Grom Hellscream's Warsong clan in the Tirisful woodlands, Sai-Dan had always been on the front line. So in the end, even though Frostmourne had already pierced through the line of defense formed by his sword and shield like a venomous snake, and pierced through his chest armor, he could even feel the instant pain from his chest and the numbness from the ice seal. Even though the bystanders cried out in shock and everyone thought he was going to die, he did not give up. It was a backward lean similar to the Iron Bridge of China's Kung Fu. In Azeroth's combat training, there had never been such a posture. Lordaeron's swordsmanship training focused on the extremely strict T-step, where the toes were almost 90 degrees apart. This way, whether it was advancing or retreating, moving left or right, it was very flexible. However, only experienced warriors who had fought against the Horde for a long time would understand that in the face of enemies like the orcs, whose strength and speed were far superior to their own, the T-step was nonsense. In the face of such overwhelming power, as long as he used any method, no matter how pathetic he was, he could teach those flawed orcs a lesson after dodging the first blow. Sai-Dan knew that if he leaned back like this, as long as Arthas's magic sword pressed down, he would still be a corpse. In that case, he would at most live for 1/10 of a second longer than before. But he had to gamble. He gambled that someone would come to save him in the next moment. This person would not be Mograine or Turalyon. Both of them had tried their best. Then, would the final redemption and despair come? Sai-Dan prayed in the darkest of despair. Then, he saw light. Golden light. Normally, non-clerics could not have golden light. However, the unquestionable divine aura told him that it was indeed holy light. Sai-Dan's mouth was wide open. It was as if he had seen the arrival of an angel who could slay evil and exorcise demons. Although the angel looked very strange, he was wearing the typical Stormwind blue and white knight's uniform with gold trim, but he was not wearing a single piece of armor. The angel who descended from the sky held a staff that emanated a purplish-blue radiance in one hand and a golden holy sword that seemed to be used for important rituals in the other. It was a sword that was extremely precise. That was also a sword that saved lives. Like the most dexterous tailor in the world, it accurately pierced Frostmourne's blade like a needle. If it was an ordinary epic-ranked longsword, it would be impossible to block or delay Arthas' demonic sword in the slightest. However, this sword exuded the same holy radiance as Quell Zarum. Dang! A crisp sound tugged at everyone's heartstrings. A miracle had happened. The slender holy sword miraculously forced away the blade of Frostmourne that was about to slash down. Even though Arthas had already lowered his wrist with force, it was this difference of a millimeter that caused his sword to slash diagonally to the right instead of downwards. It was this little barrier between life and death that Sai-Dan grasped. His right shoulder sank, and he rolled on the ground in a very ugly manner. In the end, he escaped the fate of having his intestines cut open. This was not without a price. The breastplate on his right chest was shattered into pieces, and a terrifying wound that was 4 centimeters deep was pulled out horizontally on his chest. A black icy aura was corroding Saidan's body at a high speed. Without even a tenth of a second of hesitation, Saidan Dathrahan directly used his ultimate move. Holy Healing. It was a peerless ultimate move that could reverse life and death at a critical moment. Paladins who had not stepped into the realm of heroes were not even qualified to use this ultimate move. The core of this move was to exhaust every drop of power in the user's body, every bit of holy light, and then instantly erupt to heal the target. As long as the target was still breathing, he could instantly restore his HP and resurrect on the spot. Under the dazzling holy light, not only did the wound on Saidan's chest recover in the blink of an eye, but it also forced out all the icy aura and dark power that, Frostmourne, had left in his body. Of course, such a heaven-defying ultimate move was not without a price. A moment ago, Saidan was still lively and strong like a bull, but now his mental state was like that of an old man in his 70s or 80s, extremely dispirited. After all, this was a life-saving ultimate move that squeezed out all of his essence, energy, and spirit. From his stamina, to his magic power, to his vitality, and to his spirit, everything was drained. When the angel used the perfect, arcane impact, to send Saidan flying out of the main battlefield and to the side of another paladin, Riataline, the people who were relieved suddenly discovered the truth of the angel. Damn, why does this guy look exactly like Duque? That's impossible. No, no, no. This guy is Duque. You. Turning to the side, Arthas's expression was extremely ferocious. This was a counterattack that he had planned for a long time, but it was ruined by an unexpected person. And that person was the person he hated the most, Duque. How is this possible? Forcefully pulling Frostmourne out of his body, the wound made a rotting sound like rotten wood being sawed. At the same time, Arthas once again parried the attacks from Mograine and Turalian. It's you. Arthas didn't even look at the two paladins as he stared at Duque, who had a staff in his left hand and a sword in his right. On the other side, Saidan, who had barely escaped death, subconsciously clutched his chest. With Riataline's support, he looked up weakly. Damn it! Don't tell me that you, a Breaking Dawn Archmage, are actually a warrior. Hearing Saidan's teasing tone, Turalian secretly heaved a sigh of relief. Since he could still joke, it meant that he wouldn't die. No matter what, Saidan owed Duque his life. Speaking of which, since when did Duque become a close combat professional? But it didn't matter. This was comrade in arms. A comrade in arms surprise was always better than an enemy's shock. A sense of trust evolved from gratitude arose spontaneously in his heart. However, a new problem arose. Without Saidan Dathrahan, the situation of the siege was broken. Everyone knew that even though Riataline had also stepped into the realm of heroes, she was still far from the strongest of the 5 Silver Saints. Chapter 904. At this time, both sides resumed their stalemate. Jaina's expression turned ugly. This is your plan. Arthas waved his magic sword, and a wave of icy ripples appeared in the area. Plan? No. This is all part of your plan. I fell for it. I really fell for it. At this time, Arthas turned to look at Duque and revealed a cruel smile. Do you know? Duque, you're really good at using people's hearts. You've provoked me. You and Jaina have really hurt my heart. Unfortunately. You don't have any humanity left. But you've always pretended to have humanity. Duque said with absolute certainty. Yes. Human nature was indeed a burden. If it was me in the past, I would have fallen for it. Arthas's smile was full of mockery. He turned to Jaina again. Of course, if you hadn't provoked my terrible memories, I might not have done anything. I would have just completed the task given to me by my lord. But if there's a chance, I don't mind turning all the women Duke Marcus cares about into corpses, and all the men into death knights or liches. Corpses. Although he didn't understand what it was, he could infer from the words that it was most likely to turn beautiful princesses into undead for viewing and obscene entertainment. Jaina's face instantly turned red. Not only was she angry at these words, but also because she had just pretended to be a lover. Whether it was real or fake, she looked like a clown now. Was it easy for a dignified queen to put on a show here? Fortunately, Duque helped Jaina out. Your Majesty Proudmoore, it's been hard on you to test the waters. Please leave the rest to me. Send Thorham to Theramore first, then come back as soon as possible. Yes. Jaina did as she was told. Test? Yes. Perhaps it was a test, or perhaps it was an act. Anyway, it seemed like a super boss like Arthas who could fight and take damage. Duque really didn't expect to kill him in one go. In order to make this unstable factor leave the battlefield as soon as possible, regardless of whether it was the goddess of fate causing trouble or if other existences suddenly intervened, Duque had to kill Arthas here. Even if he took a step back, he could at least ensure that he would not be able to participate in the Battle of Mount Hyjal. That's right, Arthas did not appear in the historical Battle of Mount Hyjal. He and Zul were also excluded from the main force of the Burning Legion because they belonged to Kill, Jaden. Duque did not dare to gamble. After all, even Karzak could defy history and jump out, and even Deathwing could be killed in advance. Duque really didn't know if Archimonde would let Arthas take the bullet if he was forced into a corner. Duke didn't dare to imagine what would happen if another super boss entered the fray in such a tense situation. At that time, it wouldn't just be a bloodbath, it would be total annihilation. Now, reality had proven that the power of a radiant moon was completely useless against Arthas. Jaina's icicles, frost arrows, and whatnot were all automatically disintegrated before they could even get within a 5-meter radius of Arthas. In a physical sense, they instantly disintegrated into water vapor, followed by wandering frost elementals. What's worse was that the wandering frost elementals were being used by Arthas. And Duque sensed for a moment. Even with his Breaking Dawn strength, he still couldn't deal much damage to Arthas, who was basically a demigod. In his heart, Duque spat fiercely. But it didn't matter. Duque got into a stance and muttered in his heart, "All right. Now, my left hand is staff maker, and my right hand is sword seller. 10 meters away, I'll lower your IQ. 100 meters away, I'm asking you, how are you going to block it?" Taking a deep breath, Duque got into a stance. In this era where battle mages were still a novelty, Duque's stance, which was written as a mage, was read as a berserker. Let alone the enemy, even his own people were dumbfounded. "Alexandros, Turalian, you two go. I'll use a phantom clone to support you." Mograine and Turalian secretly heaved a sigh of relief. Duque wasn't a true melee fighter, and he didn't have any teamwork. If that small body of his rushed over, they really didn't know how to cooperate. That's right, Duque wasn't short, and he also had steel-like muscles, but he wasn't wearing any armor. Although no armor could block a full blow from Frostmourne, if an elite ghoul came, their epic armor would be useful. Fortunately, Duque was a phantom, and he came to help. The battle started again. Now, it was Mograine and Turalian in the vanguard, flanking Arthas from the left and right. Queen Sylvanas continued to wait for opportunities to shoot arrows, and the berserker Duque shouted, "May the holy light shine on you," and rushed forward. No one expected the situation to be completely different. A phantom of Duque appeared 10 meters in front of Arthas. It did nothing but cast speed reduction on the fool. The magic of a Breaking Dawn mage could affect a demigod, even if it was very slight, but Turalian and Turalian immediately felt the difference. Life and death were on the line, and this was no exaggeration. The other phantom was even more savage. Holding a staff in its left hand and a sword in its right, it directly turned into a thief and rushed forward, stabbing Arthas's back. Arthas was so angry that his nose was almost crooked. He was a dead man. He used his advantage as an immortal to the limit. He had used his broken arm to kill Orgrim. He had also used his own body to almost kill a general of the Alliance. However, he had never seen such a shameless person. He actually used his doppelganger to rush over with 2 weapons and launch a barrage of attacks. As a human, there were too many places to defend. If a leg was cut off, he wouldn't be able to walk. If an arm was cut off, he wouldn't be able to attack. If an artery was pierced, he would bleed to death, and if a vital point was injured, he would also die. But how could a phantom with 2 weapons have any weak points? Either he directly destroyed these 2 weapons, or he crossed the distance of nearly 100 meters to attack Duque's body. Otherwise, Arthas would only be left with the option of being beaten up. If Duque's 2 weapons were trash or just simple magic attacks, Arthas wouldn't care at all. The problem was that these 2 weapons were a demigod, Obsidian Queen, and the other was a strange holy sword that looked like a phantom of Quell, Zerum, which was a divine weapon. One was used as a milk bottle to supply mana, while the other was agilely stabbing at the wound that was caused by the idiot just now. Frostmourne pierced Arthas's abdomen, but it didn't cause any real damage. But when it pierced through, it also pierced through the ink-black skeleton armor on Arthas's body. Since it was a phantom that went up, the shameless Duque directly let the phantom stab at a speed of more than a dozen times per second, playing with the holy sword like a flower sword and stabbing non-stop. Look at my sword manipulation technique. Du Xiaoyao smirked. Chapter 905. The undead were never afraid of physical attacks. Arrows and piercing weapons had been proven useless in countless battles. The best choice was holy light, followed by magic. If there was no other choice, one could at least use a large hammer to smash the undead into pieces and immobilize them. At first, Arthas looked down on Duque for using a rapier. But he soon realized that he was wrong. And very wrong. The shameless Duque was actually cheating the special effect. All weapons' special effects had activation limits. For example, how many attacks could it be used once, and how many seconds could it be used once? The key was that activating the special effect needed to be charged. However, Duque, who knew all this, charged the holy sword like he was loading bullets into a pistol. The Obsidian Queen, in the clone's left hand, ensured that the holy sword could be replenished with magic. And on the clone, Duque left Alonso's Fail's moral gold coin. In the 10 years that he was sent into the void with Karazhan, Duque did not think that this gold coin, which was connected to his mind, was very powerful. With his return, Duque suddenly realized that this gold coin was not as simple as he thought. For example, Mediva's moral was used up after it was used. If Mediva's moral was a disposable alkaline battery, then Alonso's Fail's spiritual gold coin was a rechargeable battery that could be recharged again and again. Under the careful analysis of the system, it was found that it could absorb the prayers of devout believers who believed in the doctrine of the holy light within 100 meters and increase the moral inside. Oh, it was the power of the holy light. This was the biggest reason why Duque could use the moral gold coin as a weapon. Now, Duque put this gold coin into the clone. So a strange scene appeared on the battlefield. Compared to Mogreine's Ashbringer, which was as huge as a door, the unknown holy sword that Duque's clone was holding was as thin as an embroidery needle. But it was this embroidery needle that made a terrifying explosion. The special effect, Holy Arrow, would be triggered 2 to 3 times every second, and from an outsider's point of view, it was even fiercer than the Dwarven tank squad's cannons. It was accompanied by the incessant sounds of chi 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 chi. With a whooshing sound, Duque relied on the agility of the holy sword to continuously send holy light into the wound on Arthas' back. Because Arthas' Frostmourne was too large, it was like a cannon hitting a mosquito. It could not hit Duque's holy sword at all. Doppelganger? Chop if you want. In any case, it was just a virtual image. It didn't matter if you cut it in half or split it in half. As long as you didn't hit the 2 weapons and the spirit coin in the doppelganger, no matter how many doppelgangers you destroyed, Duke would be able to summon another one in the next moment. Continue selling swords. Continue crafting the staff. This also increased the success rate of Queen Sylvie's sneak attacks. This scene made all the experts of the Alliance who were paying attention to the battle excited. Jaina's beautiful eyes shone brightly. No. Impossible. Arthas screamed. As Thuzad's attempt to open a portal was interrupted by Duque's main body again, everyone knew that the scales of victory were tipping towards the alliance. More than once, Arthas wanted to rush over and use Death's Grasp to catch Duque. In the end, he was either interrupted by Turalyon and Mograine, or Riataline, who was fully focused, used Holy Light to defeat Arthas. The Blood Elf Paladin could not fight against Frostmourne, but it did not mean that he could not deal with Arthas's dark magic, which was not too strong. She used her slightly slender body as a shield, blocking in front of Duque's main body. Since ancient times, quantitative change had always easily led to qualitative change. After being hit too many times, Arthas could not take it anymore. He gave up on his humanity, only making his evil soul purer and able to accommodate more dark power. After all, he was not a Lich King at this point in time, and he did not have the terrifying strength to kill young Saluphar in one move after becoming a Lich King. After Arthas's waist was hit by Holy Arrow, for the 100th time, the holy energy that had accumulated in his abdomen finally affected his movements. First, Mograine's powerful horizontal slash forced him to take it head-on. Then, Turalyon's Quell Zalim, without any fancy moves, shattered Arthas' right pauldron and pierced straight into his right arm. Arthas howled like a trapped beast, but it did not help. Taking advantage of the fact that he was not holding the magic sword firmly, Mograine used his strength to press down on the magic sword's blade. Then, he immediately slashed from another angle, aiming at the fallen prince's abdomen that had accumulated a lot of holy light. This time, there was no escape. The strengthened frost armor could not save Arthas. The evil power of darkness was instantly melted by the light of Ashbringer. The giant's sword slashed into his abdomen, triggering a chain reaction of holy light inside. Finally, under this dazzling strike, under the gaze of nearly 10 pairs of Alliance powerhouses, the fallen prince, Arthas Menethil, who killed his father and master, was cut in half by Mograine's divine weapon, the giant sword. The lower half of his body, which was still twitching, was still shaking on the spot, but he did not fall. Because of the momentum, Arthas' upper body flew up and fell a few meters away. Everyone knew that this was not the end. Duque shouted, "Last hit." Although Turalyon did not understand why it was the last hit and not the sword, it did not affect his actions. Almost as soon as Arthas' body flew away from his sword, Turalyon suddenly stomped on the ground and flew out. He raised the divine sword, Quell Zalim, high and slashed at Arthas again. As long as the sword struck Arthas' head, the almighty fallen prince who had brought disaster to most of the Rotterdam kingdom would become history after that moment. That's right. The undead could be resurrected. But the premise was that the soul was still there. Paladins did not have the power to expiate evil spirits, but it did not mean that the divine weapons of the holy system did not exist. In order to deal with Arthas, Duque collected all the evil weapons of this time. Was it not to get rid of him once and for all? As long as it hit, no matter how powerful the evil spirit was, its existence would definitely be completely erased from this world. Duque let out the most nervous roar in his heart, Motherf *Cur, how Duque hoped that after this sword hit, there would be no more problems with the Scourge army. Dreams were beautiful. Reality was cruel. A huge white bone claw suddenly appeared out of thin air. It was so huge, like a terrifying wall of white bones, firmly blocking between Arthas and Turalyon. This block was like a natural moat. Duque's face suddenly lost all color. *CK. What is this? Chapter 906. Looking at the system prompt that labeled the claw as Mother of the Frost Dragons, Syndagosa, Duque felt as disgusted as if he had eaten a fly. *CK me. Didn't I remind Malygos to help move Syndagosa's grave? What has this silly blue dragon king been doing all this time? Did this guy not take what I said seriously at all? Duque was infuriated. He was not afraid of a godlike boss, but he was afraid of a pig-like teammate. He did not do what he was told to do, and instead sent a strong fighter to the enemy. How could he tolerate such a teammate? At this moment, Duque even wanted to kill Malygos. However, the next moment, when Duque stared at the pale and huge bone claw, a cluster of resentful thoughts was analyzed by the system elf. It was a crazy resentment that had almost solidified into a solid form. In a trance, Duque saw this illusion. A long, long time ago, the chromatic dragons were given the mission of guarding the world of Azeroth. One day, Nesario created the soul of the dragon and used the excuse of fighting against the Burning Legion to deceive the other dragons into injecting their power into this artifact. In the sky above the Well of Eternity, Nesario openly betrayed his former brothers and sisters. Malygos and his beloved consort, Sindagosa, led their blue dragons to surround the Guardian of the Earth in an attempt to annihilate this great traitor of the dragons. They attacked Nesario, but Nesario used the soul of the dragon to kill almost all the blue dragons in an instant. Sindagosa was sent flying all the way to the extreme north. She, who could no longer fly, fell headfirst into the frozen soil of the Ice Crown. She was blind and on the verge of death. She desperately struggled in the direction of the Dragonbone Waste, that was the resting place of the dragons. She gathered all her remaining power and called for Malygos to help her, but the only response she got was the howling of the cold wind. The distance was too far. She desperately and painfully realized that she could no longer reach the Dragonbone Waste to rest in peace. Her sanity slowly faded along with her life. In the madness before her death, there was only hatred left in her heart, hatred for the Burning Legion, hatred for Nesario, and even hatred for Malygos. But most of all, it was hatred for the entire world of mortals. At the moment of her death, Sindagosa swore revenge. Lich King Zul resurrected her and gave her a chance for revenge. She also became one of the leaders of Ice Crown Castle, the mother of all frost dragons. The image ended here. The bone dragons were not liches. What little rationality they had left was not enough to hide their thoughts. This was not important. Their strength made up for everything. Only Duque knew that perhaps it was the changes in fate that made everything messed up. According to the original history, Sindagosa would need at least another 20 years to come out, but he attacked Arthas ahead of time. As a result, the current Lich King Zul went to resurrect Sindagosa. If that was the case, then Zul had long since set his eyes on Sindagosa, who wasn't in the Dragonbone Waste. It was just that for some reason, he didn't revive her at the start of the third battle at the Dark Portal. Perhaps it was to nurture the dark power of the mother of the frost dragons, or for some other reason. Duque could suddenly understand why Malygos, the Blue Dragon King, did not bring Sindagosa's remains back. When love turned into hate, the more love there was, the more hate there was. The death of his partner was a tragedy. But to find out that his partner's hatred for him had not dissipated even after 10,000 years had passed was unbearable for anyone. Bringing the remains of a dragon with such resentment back to the Dragonbone Wasteland was like inviting a wolf into the house and tearing down his ancestral grave. Alright, understanding is one thing. If you didn't move the grave, Malygos, you bastard, you should have told me or my people. You bastard blue dragon, you've screwed me over. Well, understanding was not the same as understanding. Du hated Malygos, who had not buried his wife's body for 10,000 years. Without the mess Malygos had left behind, how could Sindagosa have interfered? Teleportation with enemy interference was extremely dangerous. If it had been a human, they would have been turned to dust long ago. But Sindagosa, who was a blue dragon, was different. His body was unimaginably tough and could withstand even more spatial distortion. That was why Zul had personally intervened and used Sindagosa's claws to save Arthas. Ha 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 ha. Ha 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 ha. Duke Marcus. I will be back. I will definitely be back. When I return, it will be the end of all living beings in this world. Arthas, who only had half of his body left, laughed maniacally in the gap between Sindagosa's claws. Duque bared his teeth and ordered, Mograine. Turalian. Destroy his evil half. The two holy knights immediately understood. Right in front of the furious Arthas, two holy swords chopped down, completely disintegrating the lower half of Arthas' body. No! With Arthas' angry roar, the frost dragon's bone claws finally disappeared into the huge portal. A smile finally appeared on Duque's lips. The Lich King Zul had originally wanted Arthas' body. Now that half of the fallen prince's body had been destroyed, would Arthas become the next Lich King in the end? This was really a thought-provoking conjecture. As Arthas retreated in a sorry state, the entire forest finally returned to silence. Mograine and the others gathered around. This battle of ours. Turalyon was a little hesitant. Duque let out a long breath. At least it was a success. The body of a Death Knight can indeed be reconstructed, but the new creation is definitely not as good as the original. We can at least be sure that Arthas will not interfere in the Battle of Mount Hyjal. Everyone breathed a sigh of relief. At least no one from the Alliance died, but half of Arthas's strength had been destroyed. Duque turned to Turalyon and asked, after using Holy Healing, Siddan. Turalyon smiled. It's no big deal. He just overdrew his energy. The holy light is not dark energy, so there won't be any side effects. Just give that guy an extra chicken leg for his 3 meals. However, I'm afraid we can't count on Siddan's combat power for the Battle of Mount Hyjal. Duque waved his hand, indicating that it was fine. He had brought so many people with him just to be on the safe side. After all, in the original history, the Alliance had only sent Janus Theramore Expeditionary Force. Suddenly, in the far north of Felwood Forest, a huge wave of dark energy shocked everyone. That's... Queen Sylvanas was shocked. It's nothing, Duque patted Queen Sylvanas on the shoulder and smiled. A Dreadlord must have died. Chapter 907. How awesome would a legendary hero who had stepped into the realm of heroes be? Just look at an egg. 10,000 years ago, Illidan used the power of a demon to destroy the Burning Legion. What arcane power could not do, the demon's dark energy did. Even when he was captured and locked up for 10,000 years, he never changed his mind. Anyone who was locked up in a sealed space without seeing the sun or moon for a month would go insane, let alone 10,000 years. Fortunately, Illidan was blind 10,000 years ago, or he would have gone even crazier. Even though he was suspicious of Arthas' motives, Illidan was still thirsty for magic. He felt that with the power of Gul'dan's skull, he should be able to defeat the Burning Legion's army in Felwood Forest. So, he easily took down the demon guards guarding the artifact and got what he wanted. Hiss! Illidan gasped, then he was immediately amazed by the power contained in the magic artifact. A normal magic artifact would not be able to attract Illidan. But how attractive was this divine artifact-level magic artifact to him? To put it simply, he was willing to be a moth to a flame. Why? Gul'dan was a demigod, and after he jumped ship from a shaman to a warlock, his strength was undoubtedly top-notch. The key was that he died in the tomb of Sargeras. Gul'dan, who had a powerful soul and unparalleled resentment, was immersed in the dark power that flowed out of the tomb of Sargeras for a long time after his death. This made the quality of the entire magic artifact even higher. Illidan would never forget the scene of him activating the power that Sargeras bestowed upon him during the War of the Ancients, and the powerful power that he could not stop. He could still remember the feeling of the powerful energy flowing through his limbs. This addiction made Illidan choose to absorb the power of Gul'dan's skull without hesitation. Just a small portion, but he was like Popeye eating fresh spinach, the muscles in his limbs all swelled up. If he did not restrain himself, perhaps he would have completely turned into a demon. Even so, after Illidan absorbed the power of Gul'dan's skull, he immediately turned into a demigod. Huff, huff. Illidan's enlarged nostrils spewed out turbid dark power. He enjoyed this feeling very much. Unlike those pitiful wretches who were overwhelmed by the violent power, Illidan was very clear-headed. He knew what he wanted and what he had to do. Now, it's time to complete Tyron's quest. With power, nothing was a problem. With the magical profession of demon hunter, Illidan's body was like a black gust of wind, shuttling between the tall trees of Felwood Forest. The stench of a demon floating in the forest was the best guide. It was no different from having a radar. It was just that Illidan was extremely sensitive to demons. The pollution isn't enough. The Great Master is about to obtain the treasure from the Endless Sea. He will come soon, so we must clear the path first. Huh? A greenish-black shadow suddenly shot out from the jungle like a bolt of lightning. Like a crescent moon, dozens of demon heads with long curved horns soared into the sky. Even the leader of the Dreadlords, Tichondrius, couldn't help but feel a chill run down his spine. A powerful enemy. Who is it? Accompanied by a curse, the Dreadlord raised his hand and cast, Putrid Hornet Swarm. A large number of creatures and insects that lived in the darkness responded to the Dreadlord's summon. This black wave of foul aura immediately turned the entire area into a kingdom of death. If Illidan was still in the cone-shaped area that was being attacked, he would have turned into a pile of scarlet bones. He was too fast. The speed of an agile hero was definitely beyond the imagination of mortals. It looked like he had been hit, but in reality, Tichondrius had missed by at least 90 degrees. Woo! Without giving the Dreadlord any time to react, his winged back suddenly had two horrifying bone-deep wounds. One could even see that his shoulder blades, which were many times harder than steel, had also been cut deep by the sword. Tichondrius was scared out of his wits. What made him even more worried was yet to come. The dark energy circuit in his body was suddenly disrupted by a very terrifying force. A force that was even more intense than fire rushed into his dark energy circuit. Not only did it evaporate at least 1/5 of his dark energy, but it also caused a chaotic shock wave that caused damage to his internal organs. While he was not paying attention, 4 consecutive slashes landed on his left rib. This caused the Dreadlord to let out the loudest cry of pain since the start of the battle. Just as he half knelt down, 2 more slashes landed on his right leg. Illidan turned into a tornado as he circled around Tichondrius and slashed at him at high speed. In front of Illidan, Tichondrius's movements were slower than a snail's, and each of the Dreadlord's close combat attacks was easily dodged. No! I can't go on like this. Tichondrius suddenly blasted, Putrid Hornet Swarm, at the ground. Illidan frowned and could only retreat quickly. In his opinion, he had a safe enough distance from the Dreadlord. But the Dreadlord's tricks were far beyond his imagination. He suddenly felt very sleepy. In less than half a second, Illidan fell asleep. Holding twin blades of Azzinoth, he fell asleep standing on the battlefield. The Dreadlord finally let out a sinister laugh. Absolute slumber. It was a terrifying skill that could make intelligent creatures sleep until they died if they failed to resist it. The only drawback was that external damage could awaken the victim. It didn't matter. Tichondrius grabbed Illidan tightly with both claws. Yes. He wanted to tear this night elf, who had given him painful memories and didn't know what he was talking about, into 2. Then, he would pull out his lowly soul and torture it for thousands of years. Just as he suddenly used his magic, Illidan woke up. Idiot. It's too late. The Dreadlord sneered. Is that so? Illidan replied with the same sinister smile. In the hands of the Dreadlord, Illidan was originally like a toy. But in less than 1/100th of a second, Illidan's body grew bigger, becoming taller and stronger than Tichondrius, demon. Impossible. You. The Dreadlord leader's screams came to an abrupt halt, because his heart had been clawed out by the terrifying black demon. No, it wasn't just his heart. Even his soul was pulled out by the black demon. Chapter 908. If it was a normal kill, the demon's soul could easily return to the twisting nether. As long as it was someone powerful, resurrection would not be a problem. But if it was a fight between demons, that would be bad. Especially when the opponent had the power from Sargeras' origin. No, no, no. Don't kill me. Don't. Above the heart that reeked of black blood, Tichondrius' soul that was the size of a small doll begged. However, Illidan, who had turned into a black demon, had a cruel smile that was even more demonic than the Dreadlord. Compared to letting you go, I'm more eager to see your eternal death. Hee hee. Hee 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 hee. Illidan squeezed the Dreadlord leader's heart as he cackled like an owl. Then, in an instant, he only used his left hand to punch the Dreadlord's body that was beginning to kneel. The impact was filled with the power of darkness, and it easily blasted this body that made countless living beings tremble in fear into pieces. The next moment, a black light shot into the sky. The souls that had been killed and imprisoned by Tichondrius began to escape from their soul cages and spread in all directions. Illidan did not care about this at all. Even though he had turned back into a night elf, he still enjoyed it. He enjoyed the supreme pleasure of the powerful power flowing through every inch of his blood vessels. He laughed heartily as he held the broken heart up high, allowing the Dreadlord's heart's blood to pour over his head, face, and mouth. He wanted to savor the sweetness of this victory. He wanted to savor this crazy killing, until, Illidan. The sudden exclamation made Illidan's body stiffen. He couldn't believe his ears. Yes. He was too crazy. He had forgotten himself. Even Tyrant and Malfurion, as well as the sentries and druids they brought with them, did not know when they arrived at this ruined battlefield. At least 4 digits of his fellow night elves had witnessed his transformation from a demon back to a night elf. That's right. Illidan could ignore the gazes of his fellow night elves because from the day they convicted him and sent him to the Black Prison 10,000 years ago, they were no longer his fellow night elves in his heart. However, he could not ignore the look in Tyrant's eyes, which went from concern to disappointment, and then sadness. Tyrant, I. Illidan said the word, I, 3 times in a row. He really wanted to say, I didn't do anything wrong, I did it for you, Tyrant. But in the end, he chose to remain silent. At a time like this, all excuses would only be feeble and useless nonsense. The pride in his heart did not allow him to lower his head to anyone, not even Tyrant Whisperwind, whom he had always loved. He held his head high and looked Tyrant in the eye. He was telling her with his eyes, yes. This is my Tao. I'm not wrong. Illidan gave the choice to Tyrant. Tyrant's slender body trembled uncontrollably. She was the one who had insisted on Illidan's release. In order to save Illidan, she even killed Maeve Shadowsong's subordinates, creating a huge rift between her and the Night Elf hero. But how did Illidan repay her for saving him? Abandoning oneself to depravity. Once again, he used the power of the devil. Stronger and crazier than before. Even if his original intention was to help her, and he even killed a powerful Dreadlord for it. Unfortunately, the law was merciless. If she allowed him to continue to stay in the race, it would lead to the collapse of the ruling order of the Night Elves. Gritting her teeth and holding back her tears, Tyrant suddenly raised her head and her clear voice echoed throughout the entire Fellwood forest. Illidan's storm rage. Even though you obeyed my orders, High Priestess Tyrant Whisperwind of the Moon God's Temple to eliminate the demons in the Fellwood forest and kill a Dreadlord, you have betrayed my trust in you. You have violated the natural teachings of the Night Elves by recklessly using the evil power of the devil. Tyrant took a step forward. 8,000 years ago, we finally decided to exile the High Elves who also abused their magic and refused to obey the orders of Elun and Cenarius. So, even though you have the heart to serve the world, we cannot accept your actions and ways. Tyrant took another step forward. As the High Priestess, I hereby sentence you, Illidan Stormrage, to be exiled. Once you become enemies with the Night Elves on the battlefield, we will give you a merciless blow. Do you accept this sentence? It was impossible to describe Illidan's feelings at that moment. Had there been hope? Despair again? Following his heart? Unwillingness to be bound? Perhaps, there was everything. However, Illidan knew that the beautiful days of his childhood and youth were gone forever. And in this lifetime, he was destined to never receive Tyrant's love. But he did not regret it. He only had one word for Tyrant's reply, humph. Was it disdain? Was it contempt? Retaliation? Or something else? No one knew. The last thing the thousands of elite elves saw was the back of a lone wolf. No one knew that it would be the birth of a new legend, or the beginning of a terrifying legend. Seeing the former Night Elf powerhouse, the High Priestess' childhood friend, leave the Night Elves in such a way, every elf's heart was filled with strange feelings. Illidan left. Leading the army, Tyrande walked on the forest road, which was the path to Mount Hyjal. Malfurion, before she could finish, Malfurion interrupted, "You're not wrong. Your intentions were good, and you gave him a chance, but he didn't cherish it." Tyrande was silent. Malfurion continued, "There's no time to be sad. According to the prophet's prophecy, the Burning Legion's main force will arrive in 3 days at most. The Night Elves can only look forward now." Yes, I heard that you met that Duque. That was 15 years ago. The previous guardian, Aegwin, asked me to go over and help. He called me through Alexstrasza, and I couldn't refuse. Alexstrasza, Isera, and Nozdormu, the 3 dragon aspects, could be considered as the Night Elves' guardian deities. One gave them the World Tree. One allowed them to soar in the Emerald Dream. And one that granted them eternal life. As long as it did not go against Elun's will, the Night Elves would rarely refuse their call. "No, Tyrande, what I'm concerned about is that Alliance commander, Duke Marcus. What kind of person is he?" "A human genius, a person who will create miracles." Tyrande gave a high evaluation without hesitation. Chapter 909. Archimonde did not reach Mount Hyjal so quickly at first. Duque was glad that this bought time for the cooperation between the Alliance tribe and the Shadow Elves. Soon, Duque could not laugh anymore. Archimonde had dragged it out for too long. Whether it was the Naga in the sea or the chaos caused by the shattering of the Well of Eternity, it was impossible for them to pose too much of an obstacle to him. The only explanation was that there was something in the middle of the endless sea that attracted Archimonde. Especially when Vashj actually ran out and attacked Kul Tiras, it made Duque frown even more. Sigh. With the alliance of the Alliance tribe and the Night Elves, the Burning Legion was not far behind. With each of them feeling uneasy, the 3 factions decided to hold a formal meeting in Ashenvale's Astrana. Astrana was a fortress mostly surrounded by a lake, and it looked more like a huge group of villas in the middle of a lake. The natural and gentle style of the Night Elves was on full display in the entire fortress. What was even more rare was the location of the fortress. It was located west of the entrance to the Fellwood Forest. Normally speaking, if the Burning Legion's army went to Mount Hyjal, they did not need to pass through Astrana Fortress. This made the fortress that guarded the direction to the Black Sea coast even more delicate in terms of geographical location. Although it could not become an obstacle to the Burning Legion's advance, on the other hand, it could attack the Burning Legion's flank from the fortress. Almost as soon as they saw this geographical location, the big shots of the various factions had an association. Today, Duque, Jaina, and Sylvanas represented the alliance at the meeting. On the tribe's side were Thrall, Wajin, and the Tauren chief Cain Bloodhoof. The Night Elves were naturally Tyrande and Malfurion. The prophet Medivh, as the leader of the alliance of the 3 major factions, was the first to speak. "I welcome everyone who is willing to put aside their prejudices and cross the boundaries of race, organization, and country to gather together." Medivh spoke in the human common language. With the support of a mysterious ancient magic called language mastery, the people of the various races could not understand the common language itself, but they magically understood the meaning of every word of Medivh. With the support of this ancient spell, everyone in the hall could easily understand each other's words. Let me emphasize that the world of Azeroth, the World Tree at the top of Mount Hyjal, is a sacred tree that grows under the powerful magic spring of the Well of Eternity. It provides the endless energy for the entire world of Azeroth. If the Burning Legion were to seize the power of the World Tree, it would be equivalent to obtaining the magic spring of the Well of Eternity. In other words, all life in the world would be polluted and destroyed. Before we defeat the Burning Legion's invasion this time, no matter what kind of conflicts or blood feuds there are between the various races, I hope that we can temporarily put them aside. At a time like this, the interests of all of us are the same. At this point, the Mediv bowed in 3 different directions. In the remaining time, I hope that everyone can quickly come up with a mutually acceptable result. The leaders of the 3 parties gave friendly smiles to the Mediv. However, the atmosphere was harmonious. At the beginning of the meeting, after the Night Elves briefly introduced the military strength and defensive situation on Mount Hyjal, the 3 parties had a heated debate on how to join forces and defeat the Burning Legion's attack. Sal was the first to speak. Since the Night Elves' strongest defensive magic formation is set up on Mount Hyjal, then we can directly set up our defense along the mountain path. In theory, this was right, but it was a pity that it stepped on the Night Elves' sore spot. Tyrant objected on the spot. Grey Valley and Fellwood Forest have been the territory of the Night Elves since 10,000 years ago. We can't sit back and watch our territory be trampled on. Moreover, we need more time to strengthen the defensive line on Mount Hyjal, and the space on the mountain that can be used for defense is limited. The Night Elves hope that the Alliance and the Horde can send extra troops to resist the Burning Legion on the way to Mount Hyjal. Wajin stood up. Does this make sense? There is a limit to the total number of troops that Archimonde can bring into Azeroth. Once the Legion suffers losses, he can almost infinitely summon new demons from the twisting nether to replace them. Tyrande emphasized, within the range of Mount Hyjal, there is a large magic formation for teleportation and summoning of demons. According to our ancient documents and records from the dragons, Archimonde is quite arrogant and confident. As long as we don't cause heavy losses to the Burning Legion, we won't provoke Archimonde to send more troops. Wajin glanced at Duque, then waved his fist. You are betting the lives of the Horde or Alliance soldiers on a result that is likely to become meaningless. Our tribe cannot accept this. Sal held Wajin down. Since the Beastmen have crossed time and space to come to Azeroth, even if we are just a foreign race, we can't change the fact that we are already living in this world. Of course, our tribe is willing to contribute to this world. But the tribe has just experienced a great change, and we have less than 200,000 people left, so we can only send 40,000 elites. So, whether to push the 40,000 Horde to the front line for meaningless consumption, or to build a stronger line of defense at Mount Hyjal, I leave this decision to you, Lady Tyrande Whisperwind. Tyrande was in a dilemma. During this period of time, the Night Elves had almost figured out the Horde's resources. Even with the addition of the Tauren and Trolls, the entire tribe only had less than 200,000 people, including the old, weak, women, and children. In theory, it was definitely good enough for the tribe to send out 40,000 soldiers. Of course, if the female beastmen and orc laborers who could also fight were counted, it was not impossible for the tribe to send out 120,000 soldiers. But then, it would really be a battle of life and death. Regardless of whether they won or not, the tribe would definitely be wiped out. Tyrande couldn't help but look at the more powerful alliance. Duque smiled. Just now, Sal had played a little trick. The tribe had a small population, few soldiers, and even fewer elite soldiers. In theory, of course, this was the fault of the Alliance. If it weren't for Duque being blown up into the void for 10 years, the tribe wouldn't even have 100,000 people left. Duque said, yes. That's right. In terms of military power, our alliance is stronger, so the Alliance is willing to take on more responsibilities. In fact, at this time, the Alliance has already landed in Azeroth and turned the whole of Azeroth into a stronghold. But as the commander of the Alliance, I don't think the Burning Legion will go through Grey Valley, Fellwood Forest, and then to the foot of Mount Hyjal. Tyrande frowned. You mean, Duque spat out 2 words. Over the mountain. Chapter 9-10. As soon as Duque said that, Tyrande and Malfurion felt a chill down their spines. They had been fooled by their own fixed thinking. That's right. For tens of thousands of years, if one wanted to go to Mount Hyjal from Azhara, they had to take a big detour. They had to go to Grey Valley in the west, then to Fellwood Forest in the northwest, and finally to the west of Mount Hyjal. They had to go up the mountain from the lowest mountain on the west side. But they had forgotten that as long as they did not enter Mount Hyjal, the Burning Legion's movements were not restricted. Therefore, there was a possibility that the three parties had set up a large number of troops in Grey Valley, but the demons did not even care about these intercepting troops. They directly ran to the mountains north of Grey Valley and followed the mountains to the higher foot of Mount Hyjal. Tyrant pursed her lips. Duque said, "So, I suggest that the Alliance defend Azhara's landing point, and then defend the second battle at the foot of Mount Hyjal or in the open space halfway up the mountain. Also, the Alliance welcomes the Night Elves and the Horde to send military observers to our two lines of defense." No one knew what military observers were, but they could understand from the name. Duque was actually so generous as to let both sides send people to supervise the army? No, this was not even supervising the army. This was completely showing the military essence of the Alliance to a temporary ally. Queen Sylvanas couldn't sit still anymore, and the whisper of the wind drifted into Duque's ears. "Duque, is this really okay? Forget about the Night Elves, about the Horde." Duque smiled. "You don't know what kind of person the current chief of the Horde and Thrall are. Leave everything to me." "Okay." Queen Sylvanas chose to believe in Duque. Looking one step forward and thinking 3 steps ahead was the most basic quality of a leader. What Duque had to do was think 3 steps ahead. This temporary alliance was terrible. If the world wasn't about to be destroyed, there would be no basis for an alliance at all. Everyone knew that Taurens and Orcs were the best meat shields, the High Elves were the strongest mages, the Night Elves were the best archers, the Human Knights were the flank charges, the Dwarves played with guns and tanks, and the Gnomes played with cannons. Wow! How great it was to combine the strengths of each race. Why was it that in history, the 3 major factions had to each have their own camp and resist step by step? It was all because of that pile of bad debts. The Horde had just gotten rid of the Night Elf demigod Cenarius, and the Dark Elves had been enemies with the Alliance for more than 10 years. During the first and second battle of the Dark Portal, the Alliance had massacred the Alliance's cities, and then the Alliance had enslaved the Beast Men. From the perspective of their own race, it was hard to say who was in the right and who was in the wrong. The Alliance and the Night Elves weren't any better. Queen Sylvie sat next to Duque, almost dazzling Tyrant and Malfurion's eyes. The High Elves were exiled by the Nature Elves. Who would have thought that they would have to kneel on their knees and beg the prodigal son they had chased out of the family to come back and save them? If the person sitting next to Duque was a magic elven, such as Kale, then it would definitely be more eye-catching. Fortunately, Queen Sylvie was a ranger, so the Night Elves felt better. To be honest, they were exiled because they hated the High Elves' abuse of magic. Duque and Jaina were also secretly provoking them. So, Duque was deliberately being so generous. It was also to pave the way for a more sincere cooperation. "Here, the Alliance is willing to fight 2 battles. You guys do as you see fit." Seeing Duque like this, Medivh secretly heaved a sigh of relief. The Alliance was most afraid of the other races holding onto their own pockets and refusing to give in no matter what. If this went on, the best result would be to force them into a mess. In fact, they would still be minding their own business and wouldn't be able to fight at all. The Alliance had made a good start, and the rest would be much easier to handle. Medivh was the first to bow to Duque. "Thank you, Duque. Thank you and the Alliance for your contribution to Azeroth." On the other side, Tyrant and Malfurion also stood up and bowed. Thrall had a bitter taste in his mouth. The Beast Men had never been a stingy race. They were straightforward and liked to repay the generosity of others with generosity. But now, the Beast Men couldn't be generous. Thrall had no way of knowing whether his hometown, Draenor, was still there. The Alliance had blocked all news from the Dark Portal. If his hometown was as Orgrim had described, then after his hometown exploded, the Beast Men in Kalimdor would be the last of them. No matter how elite the Beast Men were, they were still too small compared to the Alliance's population of nearly 10 million. Moreover, even if they survived this crisis, who could guarantee that the Alliance wouldn't attack again? Although Thrall also understood that under the premise that the world was in danger of being destroyed, any post-war alliance would only be a piece of waste paper, Thrall's heart was still trembling. He had to stop the Burning Legion from destroying the world, but he also had to think of a way to preserve the vitality of his tribe. This was where Thrall was at a loss. Thrall was still too young. His expression was practically written all over his face. Duque couldn't help but laugh in his heart, but he kept a straight face. However, the Alliance won't be able to retreat to Mount Hyjal in time for the first battle in Azeroth. So, I hope that the Alliance's troops will be allowed to retreat if things go south. Tyrant and Thrall thought about it and nodded at the same time. Sure. After all, the Night Elves had repeatedly emphasized that they had a big move, but it needed time. On the other hand, as long as they could buy enough time, no one wanted to lose all their elites to the bottomless pit that was the Burning Legion. So, Duque pointed to a place on the large map in the middle of the conference room. I hope that when the Alliance's first line of defense can't hold on, we can retreat downstream from here. As Duque spoke, he looked at Thrall. I'm sorry, the Alliance's first line of defense is mostly mechanized troops. It will be difficult for them to retreat to Grey Valley, which is full of forests. Thrall was bitter. He instinctively wanted to refuse. Because the place that Duque pointed to was the River of Wrath. The River of Wrath was the dividing line between Azeroth and Grey Valley. The source in the north was near Mount Hyjal, but the downstream area in the south was the Horde's new main city, Orgrimmar. If it wasn't for the fact that the world could be destroyed, would the Alliance's mechanized infantry pass through the main gate of their own main city? Would the Horde be able to sleep? If Thrall was a calculating leader, then he would most likely reject the offer. But who was Thrall? The man destined to become the legendary Great Chief of the Horde. Whether it was in the original history or this life, he would be praised by countless orcs and even the Alliance. Not only was he wise, but he also had a heart that no great chief could reach, a heart of justice. From his mouth full of fangs, Thrall spat out 2 words. Yes. Chapter 9:11. Character determined fate, and experience determined height. Growing up in human society at a young age gave Sal a broad vision that many of his predecessors and even several chiefs in the past did not have. This was determined by his upbringing. To Duque's surprise, Sal suppressed the doubts of Dorjan and Kain. He not only agreed to the Alliance's first retreat from the River of Fury, but also generously allowed the Alliance to choose an open space anywhere in the lower reaches of the River of Fury in Duroder. Sal stood up. I can't say that I know the Alliance very well, but I know that human cement is a magical thing. It can build a strong fortress group in a very short time. If the Alliance feels that with more time, they can build a stronger line of defense, then the tribe does not mind defending the first battle at the foot of Mount Hyjal. There was a slight uproar in the hall. To be honest, there was no conclusion as to who would be at the front. Except for a certain transmigrator, no one knew what the composition of the Burning Legion's forces was. It might not be a bad thing to be at the front, because there might be room for retreat. But it might not be a good thing to be at the back, because as the mountain road narrowed, retreat would become more and more difficult. If the Night Elves insisted that they had not settled the matter and asked them to continue to fight, would they continue to fight or not? But it was obvious that a wider position would be more conducive to the Alliance's deployment of cannons. Duque was indeed interested in the line of defense on the mountainside. After all, the current situation was very different from the original history. The original Alliance only had Janus Theramore army participating in the Battle of the Seamounts, so the number of troops was naturally pitiful. Now, because Duque had saved half of Lordaeron, almost the entire Alliance was participating in the war. In addition, the Gnome's main city, Gnome Reagan, which should have happened at this time in history, broke out more than a decade earlier. This time, there was no emergency transfer of the Gnome's mechanized troops to save the situation. Therefore, the Alliance's troops were more abundant and larger. The Night Elves would certainly take the position at the top of the mountain, and the remaining 2 options were the mountainside and the foot of the mountain. But the Alliance needed the mountainside, and the tribe's cooperation was needed. Now that Sal took the initiative to propose it, he had really solved a big problem for Duque. After a slight pause, Duque nodded. Thank you, tribe, for your understanding. In exchange, the Alliance will not only provide a large number of excellent holy light weapons to the tribe, but will also provide 500 priests to assist the tribe. Also, provide 2,000 rangers to cover the retreat of the horde. Sal's eyes were half-lidded. Duque was very generous. Although Orgrim had warned Thrall more than once to be careful of Duque, Duque's performance had convinced Thrall. After getting the Night Elves' permission to cut down some of the trees in Fellwood Forest for temporary construction, Sal asked the last question, all right. As for the Night Elves, the tribe only has one last question. Go ahead. Tyrande lifted her head slightly. Whether it's the Alliance or the Horde, we're all prepared to make a huge sacrifice for this battle. I just want to know if the move that the Night Elves prepared is worth it. I don't need a specific strategy or a name. I just want you to look me in the eye and answer my question. Magic and whatnot were too profound for the beast men. The orcs, who weren't native to Azeroth, didn't want to know what the Night Elves had done in the past 10,000 years to uphold their oath. They only trusted their own instincts. Tyrande stared at Thrall and replied in an extremely sacred tone, it's worth it. And when that time comes, even if the Night Elves are completely wiped out, we will definitely fulfill our oath. Thrall let out a long sigh. I have no more questions. At this moment, he looked at Duque. What about the Alliance? Duque sighed softly. No one knows how strong Archimonde is. But I'm sure that he's at least a demigod. Those who haven't stepped into the realm of heroes can't even hurt a hair on his head. So I suggest that even if the defense line is breached, the Alliance and Horde must find a way to gather at the top of Mount Hyjal. Thrall narrowed his eyes. Like last time near the Dalajan? Yes. Thrall was silent for a moment, then his eyes suddenly widened. To be honest, our tribe has never forgiven you at all, Duke Marcus. Oh. Duque was a little lazy. When has the Alliance ever been willing to sincerely forgive the beast men who once massacred cities in the Alliance? Thrall didn't care about Duque's words at all. He continued, but for the sake of this world, we choose to believe in the Alliance, even if temporarily. I hope that before we defeat the Burning Legion, we can work together happily. Thrall strode forward and extended his hand to Duque. Typical Alliance etiquette. Duque let out a murky breath. This feeling was very strange. Two races, two great forces. There was a deep hatred between them, but at this time, they could feel each other's sincerity and chose to trust each other completely. Perhaps this was fate, an ill-fated relationship. Duque smiled. Please be gentle when you shake hands. I'm just a weak mage. If you use too much force, I'll report you for attacking the Alliance's commander. Duque's words made Thrall laugh. He replied in a rough voice, I'll be careful, like I'm dealing with your human porcelain. This was a moment of great historical significance. Duque and Thrall's handshake symbolized the first temporary reconciliation between the Alliance and the Horde in the world of Azeroth. In the face of a greater crisis, they had abandoned their differences and enmity to work together sincerely for the first time. Tyrande walked up silently and placed her delicate hand on their interlocked fingers. For the future of Azeroth, the three of them shouted in unison. A huge war machine that spanned across 8 races started to move at this moment. A few hours later, a spectacular scene appeared in Grey Valley. Tens of thousands of Alliance and Horde troops were marching along the same path. They were once mortal enemies, but now, even though they were less than 5 meters away from each other, they were staring at each other, and none of them made a move. There was no ridicule, no mockery, no humiliation, and no killing. Everyone was heading towards the same goal, the same destination. Standing high up on the hill, Sylvanas looked at the long snake of troops in the distance. He couldn't help but feel emotional. I can't believe they're really going to ally with the Horde. I always find it ironic. Duque turned his head. Ironic? I advise you to get used to it. In the future, the Alliance and the Horde might fight endlessly, or it might be a united front against a foreign enemy. This is the general trend. Chapter 9:12. Is this the general trend? Queen Sylvanas repeated, deep in thought. The general trend. Since ancient times, how many people had been clear-headed and rational enough to see the general trend? Countless idiots in high positions who thought that the world revolved around them could not see the general trend, causing him, his people, and even his entire race to pay the most terrible price. She knew of Duque's hard work. How many sleepless nights had Duque spent convincing the leaders of the various countries to temporarily set aside their hatred towards the Horde? How many easy gains had Duque given up on to connect the resources of the various factions and make use of the advantages of each faction? Duque used his not-so-broad shoulders to shoulder the future of half of planet Azeroth. Perhaps he had all sorts of bad habits, but as a person and as the leader of an alliance, Duque had done the best he could. Let's go. Since the Night Elves and the Horde have agreed to our request, we don't need to make battle plans anymore. Let's go check on the soldiers. Yes. Queen Sylvanas and Jaina, who were beside Duque, nodded at the same time. On the beach of Azeroth, huge towers rose from the ground. Those were temporary mage towers. Of course, they couldn't compare to the original mage towers, but as a pure mana amplification, it was already very impressive. A little further away from the mage tower was a modular bunker. These bunkers were all the same size, about 20 square meters in size. A few days ago, they were just steel frames. After being transported here from the Iron Furnace Castle, they were quickly poured with cement that had been mixed on the spot. The human engineers were using shovels to cover up the bunkers that were starting to take shape. Inside the bunkers, there would be a dwarven cannon or a few crossbowmen using exorcism arrows blessed by the holy light. With the bunkers as cover, the center of Azeroth was filled with well-organized artillery positions. If there was enough time, Duque was even willing to build an east-west railway in Azeroth. Unfortunately, this was a position that was destined to be abandoned, so what the human engineers and dwarves were busy with was a huge asphalt road that could allow 8 carriages to pass side by side. How long until everything is ready? Duque asked Lang Bronzebeard, who was in charge of defense. The dwarf prince, whose lifelong goal was adventure, had big dark bags under his eyes. We can fight at any time, but the longer we fight, the higher the chance of survival for our brothers. They are all good men of the Alliance. Duque was filled with emotion as he looked at the soldiers in the distance who were skillfully preparing for battle. He didn't know whether it was right or wrong to pull the Alliance elites who didn't need to come here. These soldiers were not ordinary rookies. Most of them were veterans who had participated in the first and second battles of the Door of Darkness. When they joined the army, the youngest among them was a young soldier of 14 or 15 years old, while the oldest was only a young soldier of 18 or 19. They came from various countries, and most of them had experienced the cruelest battle to defend the capital. At the very least, they had participated in 2 major battles with more than 200,000 people. In the wilderness, in the depths of forests, in swamps, they had built bonfires, set up camps, endured mosquito bites, and gnawed on stinky jerky and wheat cakes. Then, they risked their lives to fight against enemies that were far larger than them. Orcs, trolls, ogres, and even goblins, who were several stories tall. They had never been afraid. They repeated themselves in the baptism of war day by day, and little by little, they turned from ignorant rookies into elite veterans who dominated the major battlefields. Only this way could they be awarded the rank of sergeant after the second battle of the Door of Darkness. But this was just the beginning. Then, for the arrival of this day, they were arranged to go to various areas where demons ran rampant, and constantly sharpened their skills and tactics through the bloodiest battles. They fought satyrs, fought void trolls, and were even organized to face the hellfire summoned by human warlocks. 15 years passed in the blink of an eye. After such a long time, most of them were middle-aged, and the youngest was nearly 30 years old. They had their own families and children. Many kingdoms could not afford to support so many full-time soldiers, so they would choose to let these people retire and send them back to being farmers. But with Duke's order, these elite warriors who had long passed the peak of their physical strength were left in the dark portal's guards. Just for this day. Because they had the best martial arts and the most mature hearts. They would not lose their courage in an instant just because they saw a huge and terrifying demon, and become trash that could be slaughtered by the demon. Duque said in a deep voice, "Gather the soldiers. I have something to say." Half an hour later, in addition to the garrison troops, 50,000 soldiers arrived from a vast position that was more than 10 kilometers long from the north to the south, forming 5 huge phalanxes. Duque led the generals, kings, of the alliance, as well as the senior and junior generals, to the high platform, looked at the whole army, and took a deep breath. The weather was getting colder, and the slightly cold wind blew on their faces, making their noses hurt. But Duque could feel the soldiers' hearts were burning, and their burning gazes said it all. Duque raised his hand, hit his chest, and gave a military salute. Every general below followed suit and saluted. What followed the military salute of the generals was the uniform sound of metal clanging against each other. On the high platform, Duque took a step forward and looked at the elites of the alliance in front of him. More than 30% of the low-grade professionals were armed with all kinds of black technology, and they were a real army of tigers and wolves. From their eyes, Duque saw vitality, pride, and rising fighting spirit. There was no draft paper, and there was no need for draft paper. 15 years of being a commander had trained Duque's unnatural ability to speak without a script. Standing in front of a silver magic microphone, Duque's voice spread throughout the army. "Everyone, why have we gathered on this strange land today to prepare for battle? This is not our land, not our family, not the land where our people live and multiply. Why should we fight to the death for it?" After a pause, Duque answered his own question. "Let me tell you, this is for the survival of the world. This is not a joke. It is not something that is too far away from us. Because we are about to face the largest demon army in the history of this world, the Burning Legion. Once Archimonde, the commander of the Burning Legion, takes the power of the World Tree on Mount Hydril behind us, all life in the world will be polluted and destroyed." At this point, there was a low commotion in the 5 huge phalanxes, but it quickly subsided. Chapter 9:13. Once that happens, no one in the world of Azeroth will be able to escape death. Why? There will no longer be living fish in the sea, rivers, and lakes. There will only be countless rotting corpses. The crops in the fields will no longer grow and turn into man-eating monsters. The water in the deep wells will turn into green poison. You, your family, your people, who will be able to continue living? No one. Not a single one. We will all die. When that time comes, the entire world will perish. You and your family will become rotting and dirty corpses. You will meet your end amidst the evil laughter of the demons. Tell me, do you want such a future? As Duque's impassioned voice fell, an earth-shattering roar came from below. No. We don't want it. Duque waved his fist. That's right. We don't want it. We want to continue living. We want peace for our descendants. We want to multiply. So, what are we going to say to the damn demons with our swords and cannons? Get lost. Go to hell. Demons. Go back to where you came from. It was a messy answer, but it was more real. The 50,000-strong army was like 5 huge boiling pots. They responded to Duque's words with a loud and enthusiastic voice. Duque looked at the roaring expressions on the faces of the soldiers who were no longer young. He was satisfied. He was really satisfied. It was absolutely necessary to have a morale-boosting rally. Knowing what they were fighting for and who their enemies were would make the soldiers more courageous and determined to fight. Duque let the soldiers shout for almost 30 seconds. The next second, he pressed his hands in the air and made a mute gesture. It was as if an invisible giant magic hand had isolated the air and stopped the sound from spreading. Every big shot and general of the alliance was surprised to find that the soldiers who were shouting just a second ago had all quietened down. All the voices stopped abruptly. They were not inanimate objects. They were not the zombies used as cannon fodder by the Calamity Army. They were the most elite troops of the alliance. They were proud soldiers who had experienced countless battles. If it had been any other general with lower contributions, they wouldn't have been able to suppress them. However, in front of Duque, they were very disciplined. When Duque wanted to speak, he was as docile as a sheep. That's right. This was Duque. He was the #1 hero of the Eastern Kingdom Alliance, who had led the entire Eastern Kingdom Alliance to victory in war after war, and saved the humans, high elves, dwarves, and pygmies from extinction. Looking at Duque's face, people naturally thought of the Great Retreat after the fall of Stormwind City, the Battle of the Southern Sea, the Battle of Paladin Bay, the Battle of Lordaeron City, the Great Battle of Black Rock Mountain, and the latest Dalajan Coalition War and other glorious victories. Only Duke Marcus had such an exaggerated and unsurpassable prestige to suppress these arrogant soldiers and generals, making them feel proud of themselves and obey his orders. In front of Duque's halo of victory, even the Sint Dorii crown worn by Queen Shirley and the Courtiera's crown on Jaina's head paled in comparison. However, this wasn't important. The two queens locked their burning gazes firmly on Duque's stalwart back, their eyes blurred. Duque spoke again. Yes. Everyone is right. Planet Azeroth is our home, our homeland. Whoever wants to trample on it will have to step over our dead bodies first. That's right. Maybe we will all die. Maybe even our corpses will be desecrated by the evil Calamity Army. We might even have our souls imprisoned and helplessly become evil accomplices. However, that... Again. Like... What? Duque's voice suddenly rose by an octave, and he waved his hand. We have fought with our own will. With all our strength. Even at the end of the world, facing our ancestors, we can proudly announce that we have a clear conscience. So, for the future of our descendants. Go and fight. Go and roar. With our lives and souls, let's give our strongest voice to the damned demons. Duque raised his right fist with all his strength and pointed it at the sky. Long live the future. Long live Azeroth. Thousands of arms were raised high. It was a forest of swords. It was a mountainous sea of hammers. It was the unyielding will of billions of Azeroth creatures. They completely vented the heat in their chests, letting the thousands of voices converge into one. Long live the future. Long live Azeroth. Duque waved his hand. In the name of the Alliance Commander, I announce that the Mount Hyjal operation has officially begun. Everyone, get into position. Let's go. The square formation that was extremely neat a moment ago began to quickly disperse in an orderly manner. Under the command of the middle and high-level generals, the soldiers ran to their respective positions. The once silent beachhead erupted again. Even though they were several kilometers away, they could still feel the murderous aura from above. Turayan and Bulang came before Duque and saluted to Duque. Commander, do you have any other orders? Turayan asked. Duque looked at the undulating beach and sighed softly. Crossing the endless sea to send an army of 100,000 plus heavy equipment was already the limit of what the Alliance could do. It would be great if they could bring the main force of the Alliance here. Unfortunately, there were not so many ifs in the world, Duque said. Soldiers without the will to fight can't face a terrifying existence that is several times stronger than them. But if the will to fight is too strong, it will only cause the good men of the Alliance to die here in vain. Tell the brats below that this is only the first battle. I don't need them all to die here. Follow the rules and retreat when it's time. I have prepared a magic array near Orgrimmar to send the troops in their best condition to the mountainside of Mount Hyjal. Turayan punched his chest with one hand. His gauntlet hit his breastplate with a crisp clang. Understood. Then Turayan and Bulang went down. Just as they were about to walk down the high platform, Duque's voice floated over. Remember to get out of Mount Hyjal alive, and then find a way to get out alive. Turayan and Bulang looked at each other and smiled. Boss, you're so demanding. Of course, if we're going to fight with our lives on the line, Mograine will be the commander here. Waving his hand, Turayan's elegant figure before he left was imprinted in Duque's eyes. Mograine patted Duque's back a little grumpily. Damn it, you make it sound like I'm an idiot who only knows how to fight with my life on the line. Duque didn't reply. He looked at Turayan, and then at Mograine. Duque was deep in thought. Fate had changed. Chapter 9:14. Looking back, many people who should have died in battle were unknowingly saved by Duque. Without Duque, Turalyon would have counterattacked Draenor after the second dark portal and disappeared with the big explosion. 9 out of 10, he was dead. If Kalia was not hidden, then Kalia, who had completely lost hope in life, would have chosen to live in seclusion after the fall of Rotterdam. The scattered people of Rotterdam would have fought for themselves and composed a sad and touching death war song. The crazy Scarlet Crusade would have been born. Saidan Dathrahan's body would have been taken by the Dreadlord and harmed everywhere. Abendis would have died tragically in Hearth Valley. Alexandros Mograine would have been even more tragic. He would have been killed by his own son, Reynold. Bewitched by the Dreadlord who pretended to be Saidan Dathrahan, Reynold deceived his father and let old Mograine fall into the trap of the Scourge army. Reynold picked up the Ashbringer and killed his biological father. Although old Mograine was responsible for Reynold's downfall, patricide had always been one of the deepest sorrows since ancient times. There was also Queen Sylvie. At this point in history, she was already a banshee of death. She was bound by Arthas like a dog. Instead of having bright skin and a hardy and proud expression, she could still be alive and kicking by his side. Thinking that this might be the end of the world, Duque let out a long sigh and secretly swore in his heart. Damn it, Archimonde, you must die. Duke's inadvertent expression of great pressure was seen by the two queens at the same time. Jaina's eyes turned. Just as she was thinking of something, she caught a glimpse of the fireworks pinned to her chest armor. Yes. It was a small white fireworks used for funerals. She deliberately pinned it there to remind her of the vengeance of her father and brother. Jaina pursed her lips. When Sylvanas caught up with Duque, Jaina was still half a step too slow. But, she did not regret it. At this moment, Mount Hyjal had become a huge pre-war construction site. At the foot of the mountain, the elves who were watching felt their hearts aching as they watched the crude orc laborers chopping down the 100-year-old trees with great effort. They used the thick trunks of the trees as the pillars of the huge blockhouses, and sharpened the smaller branches and inserted them into the ground, facing the foot of the mountain, to serve as antlers. One after another, archer towers in the style of orcs rose from the ground. Tall and slender trolls nimbly climbed up the towers. They took a large piece of metal from the goblins and stuffed it outside the arrow tower to act as a shield for themselves. Then, they arranged the javelins provided by the humans in a position that was convenient for them to reach. The spearhead, which was made of fine steel, shone brightly in the dusk. At the mountain pass, the wide ground on both sides was surrounded by wooden stakes and thick ropes. There were signs in all kinds of languages stuck on them, and there were even pictures of goblins scribbled on them. Holding his beloved axe, Bloodhowl, Grom muttered, "Thrall, I don't trust those dwarves at all. Although their skin is also green, look, since noon, those idiots have already blown up more than a dozen of their own people." Thrall patted the shoulder of this senior who had narrowly escaped death. Grom. First, it wasn't the orcs, trolls, or taurens who died. Second, they aren't even afraid of death, so why should we worry for them? Before Sal could finish speaking, there was a loud, boom, sound. At least half a dozen goblins were blown into the sky and then disintegrated into green and red parts, scattering evenly on the ground within a radius of 100 meters. Then, the nearby goblins all gaped as they watched their companions succeed in courting death as if they were watching fireworks. Some even whistled. There was no need for the orcs to criticize them. A goblin sitting on a thick metal robot that was as tall as 3 people picked up the metal loudspeaker and cursed. His sharp and unpleasant voice could be heard within a radius of hundreds of meters. "Frank. I told you. Don't let those idiots go to where we buried the mines. And, I repeat, don't eat a cigar when burying the mines." The goblins below looked at their boss with puzzled and amused expressions. The goblin flipped out. "Bastard. Who dares to not listen to me? Half of your wages will be deducted." This time, the goblins below all seemed to have been ruthlessly whipped. They all obeyed as if they were facing a great enemy. On the other side, Grom slapped his forehead. His expression was clearly telling Thrall, "Look." Thrall couldn't help but bare his teeth. But then he changed the topic. "But, if this world has a future, I will consider recruiting goblins into the tribe." "Ah." Even someone as bold as Grom couldn't help but exclaim in a low voice. Thrall took out 2 axes from the box beside him. One was an incomparably crude stone axe made from sharp stones and thick branches. The other was a steel axe that emitted a cold light. It was obvious that it was a killing weapon. "One is what we can make now, and the other is what the humans just gave us. You know what I'm trying to say?" Grom was silent. He was most aware of the backwardness of the orcs in the field of forging and metallurgy. In the 10 years of living in the forest of Tirisfal, an axe forged by the dark iron dwarves, even if it had been chipped countless times, was still a treasure in the eyes of the orc soldiers. The most exaggerated thing was that this axe had changed owners for a total of 15 times, and it had never been eliminated. Why? Compared to the stone axes and hammers that were easily broken by humans, the sturdy dwarven products were, of course, more trustworthy. In the end, wasn't this the backwardness of technology? The backwardness of civilization? Backwardness meant being beaten. This was inevitable. Wajin came up and dispelled Grom's last hope with one sentence. "The trolls have spent 8,000 years to prove that using flesh and blood to fight against a higher civilization would lead to a tragic end. The Lordaeron continent that you ravaged 14 years ago, the capitals of the human kingdoms that you destroyed, were all once the territory of the Amani Troll Empire." Grom no longer raised any objections. Thrall set the tone for this matter. "We'll talk about those things later. Right now, the Burning Legion is our real enemy. We are not fighting for the Alliance at this moment, but for the survival of the tribe. Since Duke Marcus has treated us with sincerity, we must return the favor of a warrior." "Understood." Several tribal leaders answered in unison. However, looking at the noisy goblins, Thrall was thoughtful. Late at night, the tribes at the foot of the mountain and the Alliance on the mountainside were still preparing for war all night under the lights. Duque suddenly received an urgent call from Sylvanas. "Second sister is in a hurry. Come quickly." Lilith nervously informed Duque. Who knew, as soon as he entered Queen Sylvia's tent, Duque's knee was hit by an arrow. Chapter 9:15. When Duque lifted the curtain of the tent and went in, he was shocked by the darkness inside, and then he was shot. The moment he was hit by the arrow, Duke recalled a famous saying that had spread far and wide. "I used to be a dragon-slaying hero, until I got shot in the knee." Well, those were all unimportant things. The point was, Duque did not understand why Queen Mao Shi shot him with an arrow. Before entering the tent, the system elf helped him scan it, and there was only Queen Mao Shi in the tent. What the hell? Or did I make a big mistake? Queen Mao Shi finally couldn't stand me having a harem and wanted to murder her husband? Is this the legendary tragic ending of killing her husband with a hatchet? Full of questions, along with the rapid spread of numbness from his knee, almost drove Duque crazy. The strong numbness almost made Duque fall on the ground. The next second, Duque suddenly found himself buried in a pair of elastic Mount Hyjal. Duque heard Queen Mao Shi's voice. "Sorry, I used a strong anesthetic on the arrow. But it doesn't matter, it won't cause any harm to your body." For some reason, Duque suddenly remembered. According to history, After Zul's control weakened, Queen She, who had become a death banshee, relied on an arrow coated with a powerful poison to shoot Arthas. Arthas was almost completely killed. Damn it! How could I forget that Sister Mao She is a master of poison? By the way, what did I do wrong? She actually wants to use the arrow, which is worth at least 1,000 gold coins, to kill me. Duque felt like he was in a trance. He wanted to curse, but, the feeling of having his face pinched by the Mount Hyjal, was great. No, no, no. Now was not the time to worry about this. What did Queen Mao She want to do? Duque wanted to open his mouth, but he found that his whole body was numb, and he could not even speak. Don't worry, how could I hurt you? If Big Sister and Third Sister come back, they will skin me alive. Queen Sylvie laughed as she dragged Duque to the bed like a dead dog. Surrounded by darkness, his hands and feet were numb. Through the system elf scan, Duque found that Queen Sylvie had taken off his magician robe and was tying him to the bed. It was as if she was dissecting a frog from his biology class. A cold light shone in the darkness. Duque's scalp went numb. He could recognize it even if he turned to ash. That was the ultimate weapon that countless Azeroth players had used before he traveled to this world. It was the weapon that had skinned billions of ferocious monsters, even the behemoth and the dragon race were not spared. It was the ultimate weapon that the players would not change even if they changed their weapons countless times, skinning knife. In Duque's mind, the scene of him being skinned and dying tragically appeared. Not good. Guards. Protect the Emperor. Some unruly people want to harm me. With a flash of a knife, Queen Sylvie skillfully used the skinning knife to help Duque cast armor break. Then, the candlelight lit up. In the flickering candlelight, Duque saw Sylvanas, who was wearing the Queen's crown but only the Robe of Insight. The Robe of Insight was known to be on the same level as a virgin killer who wore a sweater. Duque's nose was about to bleed. At this moment, Duque just wanted to say, "You, a ranger, hunter, actually snatched the cloth armor. You're breaking the rules." Well, the dignified Queen of Sin Dorii was dressed like this to feast his eyes. Duque suddenly felt a sense of vagueness that he could die without regrets. Queen Sylvie tilted her head, her face red. Originally, I didn't want to start this hunting ritual. I always thought that you were my prey, and no one could take you away. Speaking of this, Sylvanas sighed. Who would have thought that an Archimonde would come out? Well, I can only let you have it. Ugh. Queen Sylvie sat condescendingly, her slender fingers stretched out and tapped on Duque's chest, showing a beautiful arc. She made an extremely domineering declaration. I declare in the name of the Queen of Sin Dorii, Sylvanas Windrunner. You, Duke Marcus, will be my prey for the rest of your life. You are mine. Without my permission, no one can take you away. Until the end of the world. With that, she gently dripped a drop of anti-paralysis potion into Duque's mouth. Queen Sylvie leaned down and used her fiery red lips to enjoy her prey. In the face of bullying and oppression, Duque's godly sword rose up to resist. It stubbornly faced the attack, trying to pierce through the devouring darkness. Finally, the sword light shot out, scaring the cruel queen so much that her face turned pale. Queen Sylvie's more miscalculation was yet to come. She didn't know that Duque didn't necessarily need his muscles to control his body's movements. He could use his magic circuit to control his body. Duque launched a great counterattack. He attacked. Duque's godly sword shocked the world. One sword light froze 19 continents. Duque told Queen Sylvie with hard facts, those who play with fire will burn themselves, and those who play with swords will be hurt by swords. I don't care if you're a high and mighty queen. You're also my Aurelia's sister. Kill without mercy. Look. With one slash, blood splattered everywhere. The queen, who was hit by the sword, was like a swan shot by an arrow. She raised her neck high and let out a scream. Duque. You bastard, Sylvanas cursed. Come on. Let's fight. Duque was full of fighting spirit. Berserker Duke activated Godly Sword Lunge 999 times. He directly sent Queen Sylvie to heaven. At dawn, Queen Sylvie hugged Duque tightly, tears still hanging on her long and straight eyelashes. The two woke up almost at the same time. Their eyes met. There was an indescribable deep affection and uncountable bitterness. If the scout ship's report was correct, the first battle of Mount Hyjal would begin this morning. There was not much time. Sigh. The two sighed softly at the same time and fell silent at the same time. Without a word, Duque got up. She was clearly a noble queen, but Servanas was like a gentle and virtuous peasant woman serving her husband, personally helping Duque put on his shirt and other clothes. Duque noticed that this brand new shirt had clumsy workmanship that could be said to be an insult to the elven costume designer, but the shirt was extremely fitting. Duque revealed a gentle smile. Thank you. Servana's eyes were suddenly filled with tears. Don't you dare damage this shirt. Right. If the shirt wasn't damaged, he would naturally be fine. The smile on Duque's face grew wider, and he raised a wooden scepter that looked like a drumstick in his hand. A mere Arkheron can't do anything to me. I'm the man who will take, Atish, the legendary scepter of the Guardian, in the future. Unknowingly, Servana's eyes became infatuated. Chapter 9:16. Hearing that the descending super demon was Archimonde, one of the three leaders of the Burning Legion, after witnessing the terrifying power that could destroy the world, many cowards were so scared that their legs trembled, and some even peed their pants. Even the bravest warriors crossed the sea and came to this foreign land with the idea of fighting to the death. There was only Duque, and there was only one Duque in the world. He had the ability and courage to say such a sentence. A mere Archimonde can't do anything to me. Suddenly, Servana smiled. Her smile was as bright as a spring breeze. There was no other reason. She suddenly felt that only this man in front of her who looked down on all the heroes in the world and viewed billions of demons as ants was the great hero in her heart who was worthy of being entrusted to her for thousands of years until eternity. Queen Sylvanas had the urge to hug Duque from behind. She gave up. If that was the case, then what was the difference between her and those weak women who could only watch their men go to the battlefield and could only hope for a child before the battle, and were afraid that the child would be a posthumous child? She was Servanas, the queen of the kingdom of Sin Dorii, the Valkyrie on the battlefield. If there was still a glimmer of hope in this world, then this glimmer of hope must have been fought for by her and Duque. So in just 2 or 3 minutes, she was already standing beside Duque in her military uniform. Duque seemed to want to say something but stopped. Servanas glared at him and made a seemingly ferocious expression. He fiercely spat at Duque and said while gnashing his teeth, "All right, it's my mistake. I'll look for Riadeline to treat her later." Duque rubbed his eyebrows. Most of the Alliance had a policy of taking a holiday before a battle, but the night before the battle seemed to be a little bad. Sigh, Duque looked into the distance, which was the east of Azhara's beachhead. As the last unmanned boat anchored offshore and used for detection tilted and sank, Turalyon finally gave the order, "Ready." At first, it was just a few inconspicuous bubbles, but soon the sea seemed to be boiling, and there were bubbles everywhere. In the end, it was even connected into a continuous gurgling sound. The first ugly head floated to the surface. In the command post, Turalyon could clearly see the monster through his binoculars. Mermaid? He was indeed a merman. Turalyon was no stranger to the Murlocs. Even today, there were more than 30,000 Murlocs in the Alliance. They belonged to the Murloc prophet Mauger and reported directly to the King of Stormwind, Varian. In fact, everyone knew that for some reason, the mixed legion of Murlocs and Naga had always been loyal to Duque. It was not important. The Murloc in his field of vision was even larger. It didn't look like a fishman at all. It looked more like an adult hippopotamus. It wasn't just one, but thousands upon thousands of fishmen that floated to the surface of the water. They all looked the same. Their teeth that were even sharper and more sinister, as well as their scarlet eyes that exuded an ominous aura, were all telling Turalian that there was something wrong with this vanguard of the Burning Legion. Soon, the Alliance soldiers saw a male Naga that was one size larger. These deep-sea monsters with the same pair of scarlet eyes drove the merfolk towards the shore. In just a few minutes, they had slowly come ashore from the shallows. They were less than 50 meters away from the most front line of the beachhead blockhouse. Fire arrows. Turalian's order was quickly transmitted to the position below through the most primitive loudspeaker. The enemy was the Burning Legion, and no one knew if the magic transmission would fail. The communication method that was so useful in the last battle at the Dark Portal could only be used as a support here. The most primitive communication method was more secure. A narrow fire dragon ignited at the back of the bunkers. The High Elven Rangers had already raised their longbows, and there were burning arrows on their bows. As the red flag on the towering arrow tower waved down, the silent signal made the bowstrings vibrate in unison. The next moment, most of the soldiers on the beachhead saw a fiery red line flying into the sky. The number of this batch of arrows was so small that it couldn't even be called an arrow rain at all. Naturally, the fire arrows caused almost no direct damage, but the expression on Turalian's face did not change at all as he watched the battle from afar. He was waiting for the follow-up effect, and he would see it soon. The fire arrows ignited as soon as they touched the seawater. Of course, the seawater would not burn. What was ignited was the oil that had been dumped into the sea early in the morning. For this battle, the Alliance spent a lot of money to buy more than a dozen ships of crude oil from the goblins who wanted money even in the end of the world. Oil would float on the sea, and if it was before Dubois transmigrated, this would undoubtedly be an ecological disaster. Now, once the oil was ignited, it would immediately form thick smoke. And because of the unique geographical environment of Azhara, there was a strong wind blowing from the west to the east. All of a sudden, as long as the Murlocs and Nagas dared to come out of the water, they would all be hit. They would either be wrapped in flames, or choked by the thick smoke and could not open their eyes. For marine creatures, being burned by fire was definitely a very rare thing. If these Murlocs were still ordinary Murlocs, they would definitely be scared and run around the beach, letting out miserable and annoying screams. But it was as if they could not feel the flames roasting their flesh and scales. Instead, like madmen, they were like fireballs that could run away, directly charging towards the beachhead blockhouses. Fortunately, they did not have such tenacious vitality. Most of them rushed 20 meters before falling on the beach with strange cries, becoming twitching corpses in the flames. But this scene made Turalian, who was watching the battlefield from afar, frown uncontrollably. At the end of the day, the Murlocs were just cannon fodder. This almost made him activate the next batch of traps. If there were stronger ones, then wouldn't the Burning Legion have some tricks up their sleeves? Soon, the first wave of probing attacks ended. After thousands of corpses were left on the beach, no more Murlocs rushed to the shore. The sea was still burning. Following the tide, the rolling waves of fire slapped on the reefs or the beach. Turalian noticed that the sea was still boiling. It had nothing to do with the ignited oil. It was a large number of Murlocs hidden under the water surface blowing bubbles. Immediately, a huge figure rose from the sea, causing the hearts of every Alliance soldier to jump. They were generally more than 6 meters tall, with a slightly horizontal and burly body. Their green skin glistened in the flames, and the huge iron anchors in their hands that were more than 3 meters long were even more shocking. Chapter 9:17. Many slightly petite female Naga with multiple arms appeared on the surface of the sea. They chanted incantations and covered the giants with a layer of armor-like water ripples. They looked more like flame giants stepping out of the sea. Turalian spat on the ground. Damn it! It's the sea giants. It's the Burning Legion again. The sea giants' lifelong duty was to maintain the cleanliness and peace of the ocean. They rarely came to the surface world, preferring to stay at the bottom of the sea alone. They liked being worshipped by the Murlocs, but they were mortal enemies with the Nagas. Legend had it that the sea giants would approach the surface world in search of these Nagas. Normally, it was impossible for the sea giants and the Nagas to get together. Now, it was obvious from the sea giants' violent scarlet eyes that they had been enslaved by the power of the demons. As the frontline battle, under Duque's instructions, the situation on the beach was broadcast live to Mount Hygel. In front of the 3 camps at the foot of the mountain, halfway up the mountain, and at the top of the mountain, there was a huge magic projection screen 40 meters high and 100 meters wide, conveying the information of the Burning Legion to the soldiers of the 3 major factions. At the foot of the mountain, Grom snorted disdainfully. TCH. The Golans are bigger and much more agile than these guys. Sal sighed and had to coax Grom. The Golans won't charge in a group of hundreds or thousands, and there's only one Grom Hellscream in the entire horde. Flattery was a technical skill, and once it was done well, it was quite powerful. The Hellscream family was famous for their Golans. But even in Draenor, terrifying monsters like the Golans, who were more than 10 meters tall, were still rare. According to incomplete statistics, the number of Golans could barely reach 4 figures. Usually, one Golan could lead an entire ogre clan, so Sal was right. There would never be a spectacular scene of 1,000 Golans charging. However, seeing that the Alliance's position had to face the charge of at least 500 sea giants, Sal was still worried for the Alliance, even if it was not the horde that was facing the enemy. If the Alliance's first battle collapsed easily, it would be the horde's turn to face these monsters in 2 days at most. In front of the terrifying height of the sea giants, the horde's arrow towers were toys. Sal suddenly missed Orgrim's personal guards, which were almost all elite guards made up of the strongest ogres. If it's them, maybe they can fight against the Sea Giant Legion, Sal muttered. Gazing at the projection on the mountainside, Jaina asked, "Is it really okay for you not to go to the front line?" Duque did not even look back. They are proof that I came to this world. If they fail, it will be my failure." On top of Mount Hygel, Tyrande and Malfurion's eyelids twitched. "Prepare for the ceremony," Tyrande said. Malfurion, okay. Star translated, of God. Turayan finally gave the order from the command post. Chain grenades. Of the sea. What Nagoth sea of? Of the sea. The 2 small iron balls were chained together. When the iron ball and the iron chain were shot out of the cannon, if the target was hit, the iron ball would be pulled by the iron chain and spin continuously, breaking the mast of the enemy's sailboat. 2 small iron balls were chained together. When the iron balls and chains were shot out of the cannon, the sea giant's ankles would be pulled down by the force of the impact. From the small bunker on the beach, small steel cannons fired black chain bullets, accurately hitting the sea giant's ankles, causing its huge body to stumble. Looking at the struggling sea giants, Turalian raised his right hand and swung it down. Turalian's adjutant immediately understood and gave the order that he had already prepared. First artillery team, first shooting Zhu, 3 consecutive shots. Turalian's adjutant immediately understood, and in one breath, he gave the order that he had already prepared, Artillery Team 1, shooting Zhu Yuan 1, 3 consecutive shots. Behind a small hill at the back of the beach, the dwarven cannoneers were busy communicating with each other using hand signals and semaphore signals. They fired a large number of mortar shells at their predetermined targets. Whoosh whoosh whoosh, after the ear-piercing sound of something tearing through the air, a series of rumbling explosions rang out. The entire beach instantly turned into a fiery hell. The sea giants' crude leather clothes and shoulder armor made from the skulls of large deep-sea creatures could not withstand the explosion of modern gunpowder. Flesh and blood flew everywhere. A few unlucky ones were blown to death by the mortar shells. Perhaps, this was a kind of luck. Because their compatriots were often too tenacious, they had to struggle on the beach for a long time before they finally breathed their last. Turalian, who was observing through his binoculars, said, "First artillery team, retreat." The adjutant seemed hesitant. The situation was just right. If there were 2 more waves, the effect would be better. After all, it was very inconvenient to install the mortar in this era. It would be troublesome to adjust the design parameters after moving the position. Turalian's thunderous roar followed, "Execute the order." The adjutant shivered and immediately relayed the order. Fortunately, the alliance was not greedy. The Burning Legion's counterattack arrived almost as soon as the artillery team retreated. It was the group of gargoyles that swooped down from the clouds. They swooped down so quickly that the alliance's griffins could not reach the scene in time. Unfortunately, they missed their target, and had no choice but to engage in battle with the Griffin squadron that arrived later. On the sea, a figure that seemed to be standing on the waves snorted coldly. Useless. It was a great lich. He gently clenched his claws that were full of white bones. In the next second, a scream came from beside him. "Ah, my lord, spare me." It was a huge female Naga with a beautiful face but a dangerous aura all over her body. In the original history, she single-handedly directed the fall of the Blood Elf King Kale, and became Illidan's sharpest lackey. She was the former Queen Azhara's personal maid, the future Kolifang Queen Vashj. Originally, she should not have directly participated in the Burning Legion's Mount Hyjal operation. But under the teasing of fate, she unexpectedly joined the Burning Legion in advance and became the vanguard of the invasion of Mount Hyjal. Useless trash. Since you are still of some use to the Burning Legion, get lost. The Great Lich said with extreme contempt. Thank you, Lord Reki Winterfrost. Vashj hurriedly dived into the deep sea. The beach fell into a strange situation. The Burning Legion stopped attacking. Only the dying sea giants were still struggling. Even the bubbles that floated to the surface had disappeared. Just as Turalian was confused, the adjutant's reminder startled him. Look! Following the adjutant's finger, Turalian was shocked to find that the horizon had become the horizon. Chapter 9:18. The Alliance soldiers who had just repelled the Burning Legion's first wave of attack were dumbfounded. The sea had turned into land. What was going on? Every soldier felt that their brains were not enough to process the situation. Moreover, the water on the beach suddenly receded, leaving only jagged rocks and gravel exposed in the air in the place that was previously full of water. Turalian's reaction was still the fastest. Retreat! 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 All the front-line positions near the coast evacuate. Half of the second-line positions. Don't worry about the equipment. Evacuate the people first. When the emergency evacuation order was given, the entire beach was in an uproar. In this day and age, the dwarves were the best at using cannons. Therefore, most of the people who had set up positions on the beach were dwarves. These guys who had developed horizontally took quick steps with their short legs, retreating from the large preset pipes behind the bunkers along the arrows. In less than 5 minutes, all the Alliance troops within 100 meters of the beach had been evacuated. Only then did everyone see that there seemed to be an additional blue line in front of the horizon that suddenly appeared on the sea. When the commanders used their binoculars to take a closer look, they realized that it was a super tsunami that was enough to completely destroy the entire coastal defense line. Just looking at the terrifying waves that were at least 10 stories high, they felt like their minds were going to collapse. No! Damn it! Continue to retreat. Second line. Turalian felt like he was going to collapse. Although Duque had told him time and time again to let go of his phenomenal power and put the most terrifying situation on the Burning Legion, who would have thought that the Burning Legion was not playing a landing battle, nor did they pull a few hundred ships over, but directly using a huge island to crash over. Ever since Thoradin the Great established the Arathar Empire, there had never been a military academy that taught commanders to be careful of an entire island crashing into them during a beach defense battle. Suddenly, Duque's voice was transmitted through magic to the command post. The third line of defense is also evacuating. The fourth line of defense is evacuating at 1, 3, 6, and 7 o'clock. The rest of the troops on the high ground do not move. Give up after evacuating the 3rd, 5th, 8th, and 11th passageways. They will be flooded, so there is no need. The 2nd Dwarf Steam Tank Regiment is ready to counterattack. Listen to the order to enter the tank trench in 5 minutes. Don't worry about the water, the tank is there. 3rd, 4th, and 5th Artillery Squads, prepare to advance slowly into the barrage. Fire at A3, B7, and C4. All Griffins, move out. Crane wing formation at the front, and one-line snake formation at the back. No one understood how Duque came to this conclusion. To be honest, it was a big taboo to command beyond one's rank. It would affect the prestige of the commander on the spot. However, in the face of such an earth-shattering attack, protecting the troops was their top priority. If the adjutants were to hurriedly transmit the general order to their subordinates, then the orderly evacuation would become incomparably chaotic. My apologies. Turalyon bowed to the mirror image of Duque. It's not your fault. Asking a human commander to command a cannon system that the dwarves have yet to fully understand is too difficult. I will write an artillery command manual for the Alliance, Duque said calmly. As for Duke, Turalyon was in awe. During the 10 years of Duque's disappearance, the military of various countries had focused on studying Duque's battle examples. They had pessimistically discovered that Duque's various war inventions, tactics, and tactical ideas were at least 50 years ahead of the entire Eastern Kingdom. If it were not for Duque's sudden appearance, early unification, and various tactical strategies that were still considered exaggerated to this day, the Alliance would have paid the price of at least 500,000 soldiers dying in battle, and 3 million civilians perishing. Of course, none of the military bigwigs thought that it was the work of a transmigrator. Most of them thought that it was just a whimsical idea of the mysterious pharaoh. 10 minutes later, when most of the troops had successfully evacuated, the monstrous wave finally slammed into the shore with the momentum of God's hand slapping down on the mortal world. The sand and stones on the shore flew into the sky. The corpse of the deep-sea giant, which weighed more than 10 tons, and the small bunkers on the shore that could only accommodate 2 dwarves and a small cannon were all thrown into the sky like toys thrown aside by a naughty child. Even the headquarters of the Alliance, which was a full 5 kilometers away from the beach, could clearly feel the strong vibration. The entire wooden house in the kitchen outside the headquarters, which was built with wooden planks, was creaking as if it was under unimaginable pressure. Its wooden walls, floor, doors, and windows were all trembling as if they would fall apart at any moment. The ingredients on the wooden table and the chopping board were like freshly cooked popcorn, bouncing up and falling to the ground with a bang, bang, bang. Turalyon and the other commanders were suddenly extremely glad that their own headquarters was made of reinforced concrete. Although in Duque's opinion, the cement made of brittle, low-quality steel and volcanic ash was simply substandard, it was really many times better than the wooden house that was like tofu dregs. Previously, there were people who complained about the smell of cement and limestone in the command post, but now, everyone could only feel lucky. Finally, the huge island that was like a continent where the Burning Legion was located appeared in front of everyone. Whether it was the Alliance by the beach of Azhara or the bigwigs of various races who were watching the live broadcast on Mount Hyjal, all of them were dumbfounded. That was a zombie tide that was calculated in the millions. At the end of the dark, almost endless sea of zombies, which could only be seen with high-powered binoculars, a large number of Burning Legion demons that were more than 5 meters tall were ready to go. Fortunately, all of them were veterans, and fortunately, Duque's precise command of the trench had allowed the Alliance to avoid more than 90% of the losses. Otherwise, panic would have erupted uncontrollably at this time. Duque pondered for a moment. Turalyon, Bulang, I'll leave this to you. The two replied in unison, yes. Less than half a minute after Duque's image disappeared, an earth-shattering cannon suddenly sounded. Listening to the sharp whistling sound coming from the sky, the commander of the Burning Legion on the huge floating island, Reki Winterfrost, showed a puzzled expression. Unlike the Liches who were loyal to the Lich King, Reki Winterfrost was the most fanatical follower of the Burning Legion. His powerful magic power and cruel demonic spells made him a capable subordinate under Kil Jaden. Originally, Reki Winterfrost should have first appeared during the siege of Hearth Valley, but history was greatly skewed. In this life, he had not appeared at the front line at all until today. Due to his hatred for the Calamity Army and his loyalty to the Burning Legion, he quickly became another Archimonde's vanguard general after the Archimonde's arrival. Chapter 9:19. To be honest, Archimonde looked down on the combat power of the Scourge Legion. In the eyes of the commander of the Burning Legion, zombies and ghouls were broken toys that weren't even as good as dolls. However, Reggie Winterfrost persuaded Archimonde with a reason. "Honorable sir, the humans and orcs defending Mount Hyjal are as weak as these zombies. If Sir goes down personally, you probably won't enjoy the battle." Archimonde had never been afraid of godlike enemies. Back when Sargeras recruited him and killed Jaden, it was the creation titans of the Pantheon who fought head-on. So when he heard that the opponent was weak, Archimonde hesitated. That was because many of the demon legions had been pulled to the outer defense circle of Azeroth by Jaden to attract the dragon aspect. He didn't have many direct demons on his side. With that in mind, he agreed. "Reggie, I'll leave the task of cleaning up the trash to you. Don't call me before the enemy powerhouse comes out." But now, Reggie Winterfrost felt that he might have let him down. That was because he and his men were going to face the most insane cannon of this era. Before Duque was sent flying into the void, Duque had proposed the theory of rifling to the dwarves and gnomes. Only by adding rifling to the barrel of the cannon could the cannonball have a stable trajectory, and the cannonball that was fired could be controlled. Otherwise, in this era where muzzle-loading cannons were rampant, even the best gunner wouldn't be able to predict where the cannonball would land after it had flown 2 kilometers. A gunner with an error of 100 meters was already considered a godlike gunner. In Duque's opinion, without sufficient industrial foundation, it would be impossible to cast a cannon that could fire a cannonball 5 kilometers away. After all, this involved a lot of things such as steel quality, lathe accuracy, and a series of things that were considered black technology in this era. The funny thing was that Duque had once again underestimated the abilities of the dwarves and gnomes. The gnomes never lacked ideas, but they lacked reliable ideas. Duque's successful experience on Earth had been proven and refined countless times. To the gnomes, this was simply the will of God. In the eyes of Jurban and other master craftsmen, Duque could find the path to success without failure. Duque was the true god of craftsmanship. Since it was the work of God, how could the gnomes not complete it with their lives? Maybe one day, Duque would be in a good mood and suddenly think of how to clean the radiation in the gnome's hometown. Gnomes would be saved. So, the quality of the steel would explode? Then I'll just make the barrel thicker and bigger, will that do? Would it explode after a few shots? My worst-case scenario is that the barrel would only be used once. You want high-precision rifling? Look at my gnome godly technique. Tie a rope to the cannon's chamber and carve out a perfect rifling with my bare hands using a hammer and chisel. The result was the 36 lesser Duke cannons that were placed on Azhara's beach. The diameter of the barrel was 800 millimeters, and it was 10 meters long. When the cannon was unfolded and fixed, it was 28 meters long, 5 meters tall, and weighed 288 tons when it was in combat mode. It sounded like the caliber was much smaller than the small steel cannon that sent countless orcs to hell during the Battle of Blackrock Mountain 13 years ago. But if one considered that the range of the little Duque cannon was more than 4 times that of the small steel cannon, with a maximum range of more than 10 kilometers, any commander with a brain would know that the military value of the little Duque cannon was an epoch-making product. If it wasn't for the equally unscrupulous Mage Dalaran who had developed the upgraded military magic, defensive cannon shell, specifically for the Mage Tower in the past 10 years, using defensive arrow as the blueprint, perhaps the gnomes would have had the strength to conquer the world. But I digressed. Such a huge object had encountered great difficulties in assembling, transporting, and shooting tests. But in order to save the world, the gnome craftsmen had assembled 36 little Duque cannons within 3 days. When a shell weighed more than 3 tons, and the dwarven secret chamber guards had to use Avatar to turn into small giants to load the shell, one could imagine how powerful the explosion would be. The huge floating island, which was already at the edge of the beach, produced an endless and terrible storm. First, there was a strong explosion that shook the mountains. At the front edge of the floating island, not to mention the zombies at the landing point, even the thinner edges of the island were directly blown up, causing the terrifying effect of the island sinking. Everything within the range of the shell disintegrated. Whether it was an elite ghoul with a body as hard as steel, a gargoyle made of solid obsidian, or a bone dragon with incomparably thick bones, they all turned into countless pieces like butterflies in a storm. The cannonball exploded and sputtered metal shrapnel, easily shredding all the nearby existences into pieces. Even the zombies 300 meters away were blown away. Even the undead monster, Abomination, which weighed more than 5 tons and was sewn together from a large number of corpses, was blown away by the strong wind and rolled to who knows where. What's going on? Who can tell me what's going on? Reki Wintry was furious in the Soul Connection Network. It seems to be a human cannon, a low-level lich replied. Bullsh *T. Of course I know about cannons. How can they shoot so far? Under such a terrible attack, even the Calamity Army, which was claimed to have absolutely no problem with morale, could not help but fall into chaos. 5 minutes passed quickly. The sky was filled with that terrible whistling sound again. This time, Reki Wintry chose to let the liches cast a spell and set up a huge magic barrier. The next moment, the power of science and industry collided with the mysterious power of magic that had nothing to do with each other in the air. At that moment, the entire eastern sky flashed with the brilliance of magic. The frost element and dark force formed a dense array of runes in the sky that emitted an evil spiritual light. These runes formed a huge shield, resisting the kinetic energy of the huge shell. Originally, this overlapping grayish-black shield seemed to be able to resist these shells. However, when the first shell was detonated by magic in mid-air, the entire magic shield suddenly cracked. Countless magic runes exploded in mid-air, and this destruction immediately spread in all directions. The protective shield, which was constructed with the magic power of Reki Winterfrost and the other liches, could only withstand 12 super cannonballs before collapsing. As a result, 24 shells fell closer to the center of the island. It was as if there was a moment of delay before the destructive shock waves swept across the entire front of the island. Chapter 920. Tyrant and Malfurion had been focused on their work, but the horrifying explosion and light in the projection attracted their attention. Their faces, which were naturally slightly purple, were now a little pale. Elune above, are the Alliance's weapons so terrifying now? Tyrant sucked in a breath of cold air, but she quickly patted her chest in fear. Fortunately, that hit the Burning Legion's head. Malfurion was more objective. It's fine. This level of attack is far from enough to break through the magic circle of Mount Hyjal. Also, the Alliance's strength is a good thing for us now. However, this reminds me of... The 2 night elves fell silent. It was too similar. As survivors who had personally experienced that horrifying scene, they couldn't help but think of the explosion of the Well of Eternity 10,000 years ago. Back then, the entire world of Azeroth only had one continent, Kalimdor. Back then, the Troll Empire's territory spanned across the entire continent, occupying nearly 70% of the continent's surface area. Back then, the High Elf civilization was extremely prosperous, and Queen Azhara's power could be said to rule the world. Following that earth-shattering explosion, everything changed drastically. The huge Kalimdor continent was blown into 3 pieces, actually, it was 4 pieces, as the Night Elves thought that Pandaria was gone. The Troll Empire's soldiers began to weaken. The High Elves who advocated pulling the Burning Legion into Azeroth were exiled to the depths of the sea, cursed, and turned into the Naga of today. Fortunately, the fierce artillery fire only brought back the bad memories of Tyrant and Malfurion. On the other side, the situation on the giant island where the Burning Legion was located was very interesting. At that moment, the entire island seemed to have experienced a terrifying earthquake. The wide ground near the front of the island bulged with huge wrinkles, and the zombies who couldn't dodge in time all fell into the deep crevices and became meat pies. The towering stone peaks in front of the island that had been modified into watchtowers fell like dominoes, affecting countless undead monsters. Attack! Attack! Rush to the shore immediately, Ricky Wintry ordered in a fluster. He finally understood that allowing the Undying to stay on the island would only make them targets that would be pointlessly exhausted. Even if the island hadn't completely washed up on Azhara's coast and thrown the undead into the sea, those idiots would at least walk on the seabed and complete the landing. Many zombies with missing arms and legs jumped into the sea under the command of the high-level lichas and necromancers. In such a chaotic situation, only less than 10% of the frontline troops were evacuated. On the other hand, the large number of gargoyles that soared into the sky began to cause casualties to the Alliance. The Griffin Legion only blocked most of the gargoyles, and the Dwarf Knights, Tempest Hammer, also smashed many of the gargoyles into pieces. They scattered down like a goddess scattering flowers, but there were still many gargoyles that dived into the Alliance's formation. Every time they launched an attack from the sky, it would always bring about a reign of terror and bloodshed. Or disembowel some wretch. Or he would bring someone even more pitiful into the air and then drop them down from a high place, smashing them into minced meat. Or maybe they were unlucky enough to bump into a holy knight who was guarding nearby, and they were killed by Hammer of Wrath. Bastard, wait for my troops to reach the shore. Lich Reki thought maliciously. At this moment, a large number of undead creatures surged onto the shore like a tide. The dwarf steam tanks that had just rushed into the pre-built trenches began to fire. Fire! Fire! They are antiques from 13 years ago anyway. Let them unleash their last bit of heat. Fire with all your strength, don't be afraid of blowing up. Bulang commanded loudly, and his thunderous roar spread throughout the front line. The old dwarf steam tanks still used the old rifled mortars. The barrels were thick, and the shots were close, but the power was still there. Especially since it was the heroic weapon that ended the second battle of the Dark Portal, making this place the final home of this batch of tanks seemed to have added a special layer of meaning. The dwarf cannoneers were sweating profusely as they loaded the cannonballs and fired with the efficiency of the barrels. When these experienced cannoneers realized that the barrels were overheating, they immediately abandoned the tanks and ran away. With their short legs, they climbed onto the pre-prepared mining carts that were placed on the narrow iron rails, shook the levers, and started the human-powered mining carts to run away. Reki Winterfrost was almost mad with anger. He had lost 30% of his million-strong undead army before they even engaged the enemy. Because they fell into the sea, were washed away by the tides, and were suppressed by the floating islands, he lost another 10%. As soon as they landed, the despicable dwarves ignored the cannon fodder of the zombies and ghouls, and directly aimed at the few crypt fiends and fired, blowing up the large-sized spiders. That was not all. The vanguard was clearly close to the steel cannons, but the dwarves ran faster than rabbits with their pitiful short legs. They did not manage to catch many people alive. Without corpses, the snowball tactic that the Calamity Army was good at couldn't be carried out, and the losses were even more irreparable. Reki Winterfrost could already imagine that if Archimonde, who was resting at the back, found out about this, he would definitely not have a good time. He could only be ruthless and press his troops forward with all his might. At this moment, the huge cannons that everyone thought would not be heard for a long time suddenly sounded again. Reki was dumbfounded. He definitely did not expect that the huge cannons that could fire once every 5 minutes had stopped for so long. It was actually Turayan who personally ordered the Little Duque cannon to adjust the firing elements and aim at him at the front of the island. Can the cannons kill the liches of the undead tribe? Turayan's adjutant asked. Probably not. But even if it can temporarily paralyze the Calamity Army's command, it's still a good thing. Turayan was trying his luck. Even though the huge cannonballs were obstructed, Reki Winterfrost failed once again. The dense cannonballs landed in the area he was at. Even though he was a powerful Radiant Moon Lich, he was pushed into the rubble of a collapsed stone pillar with a muffled groan. His personal guards were in chaos. As the Death Knights were not afraid of physical attacks, they did not suffer much damage, but they still staggered from side to side. Many of the Death Knights were even blasted away, landing heavily dozens of meters away. Through the binoculars, he saw a figure surrounded by white frost elements once again stand up amidst the dust. Turayan gritted his teeth in hatred. If I use, Quell, Zalem, to stab him. Turayan thought without malice. At this moment, a flash of light suddenly appeared behind Reki Winterfrost. Before anyone could react, a thin golden sword had already pierced through Reki Winterfrost's chest from behind. Chapter 921. What? What happened? Whether it was Turalian who was holding the binoculars, or the Alliance officers who were observing the enemy through telescopic magic, or even the Burning Legion itself, no one reacted at this moment. In the next moment, a cloud of black chi suddenly soared from the center of the island, covering the entire sky and forming a patch of pitch-black darkness. Then, the black clouds stopped at the highest point and came crashing down. Rottenby Swarm. It was a very signature skill. But different dreadlords had different interpretations. They were obviously dark creatures full of chaos and terror, but under the control of that person, they were played with. The dark creatures and insects that would devour everything in their path actually attacked Reki Wintry's back like ribbons along the designated route at high speed. This was an attack that the enemy had to save. The attack came very quickly and even had a faint ability to disrupt space. If it was a mage who flashed behind the Lich Reki, then he only had two choices left: give up on further attacks and focus on reopening the spatial rift and flashing away again. Continue to attack, but he would probably have to pay the price of his life for the sneak attack. Naturally, it was the Burning Legion's dreadlord, Ansaron. He thought his calculations were very accurate. It was beyond his imagination that someone in the Alliance dared to play the decapitation tactic at this time, but he could still make up for it. As long as the mysterious mage hero was delayed for a moment, the Burning Legion could react and skin the guy alive as a sacrifice. He also didn't think that a mage's physical damage could be that high. And Reki Wintry wasn't a living thing, so piercing his chest wasn't a fatal wound. Although Ansaron looked down on Reki Wintry, he still had to admit that this lich had some skill. No matter how weak he was, he should be able to fight back. Ansaron was wrong. Reki Wintry really didn't react at all. Damn it! Even a pig would cry out when it was stabbed by a sword. This guy. Ansaron could never have imagined that the sneak attack turned out to be Duque, the supreme commander of the Alliance. Ever since Duque tricked Arthes once, he had become addicted to the thrill of selling swords with one hand and crafting staffs with the other. As a warrior who was afraid to die of having his soul captured, Duque certainly would not go down personally to backstab him. The divine artifact in the hands of his clone, which had gathered 80% of his power, was the real deal. With the insane buff from the semi-divine artifact, Obsidian Queen, a normal arcane spell, speed reduction, became more than 10 times stronger. How could Reki Winterfrost have Arthes's level of magic resistance? Moreover, this lich had just used up all of his magic power to resist the cannonball, and the magic circuit constructed by the power of darkness became chaotic. As a result, the deceleration spell that Duque's doppelganger cast on him not only slowed down his movement and reaction speed, but also reduced his thinking speed to 1/10 of its usual speed. He had turned this guy into a temporary retard. After restraining was done, it was naturally time to sell the sword. Ansaron's reaction was too fast, and he did not give Duque's doppelganger a chance to land the killing blow. In the blink of an eye, Duque's doppelganger was swallowed by the dark worms. That was not important. It had already completed its mission. Before it was destroyed, it pulled out the divine artifact thin sword that was stabbed into the lich's chest and threw it out together with the staff in its left hand. The next moment, two new doppelgangers appeared. One took a divine artifact and gave Reki Winterfrost the final blow. The angel statue of Obsidian Queen gently stuck between Reki Winterfrost's eyebrows. The retard was further aggravated. At the same time, unbeknownst to anyone, a massive amount of information was forcibly extracted from Reki's mind. On the other side, the narrow and slender golden holy sword revealed its blade, and with a perfect horizontal slash, Reki Winterfrost's skull flew into the sky. The next moment, a third doppelganger appeared and took Reki's skull away. Then, all three doppelgangers disappeared at the same time. Over there. A double-headed giant sword that only the Lord of the Abyss had turned into a killing weapon that fell from the sky. It slashed through the sky and landed in a huge crater at the front of the island. It was only at this moment that the big shots of the Burning Legion realized that there was actually an Alliance powerhouse who was so daring as to hide in the crater and control a doppelganger to completely kill a Burning Legion commander. Capture him. From the center of the island, Archimonde's thunderous roar of anger came. That's right. Even if Reki Winterfrost was a weakling, he was also the commander of the Burning Legion. How could the Burning Legion face the fact that they were toyed with by a mere human who took the head of their enemy's general as easily as taking something out of their pocket? Where would Archimonde's face be? Several extremely powerful auras suddenly erupted on the island. Huge figures mixed with powerful auras rushed toward the crater, and even the surrounding space began to distort. In the command post of the Beach Alliance, after seeing the iconic staff and golden holy sword through the binoculars, how could Turayan not know that it was Duque who claimed not to interfere with command who took the lead to kill the enemy's commander? Turayan was so scared that he dropped the binoculars. If Duque was blocked on the island and beaten to death, the Alliance would really suffer a great loss if a commander was replaced by a small commander. However, with a burst of arrogant ha 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 laughter, Duque, who seemed to be unable to escape, actually flashed out from the only crack in space just before the space barrier completely closed. Looking at the flash, light that extended from the Devil's Island all the way to the beach, Turayan's heart that was hanging in the air finally relaxed. In the command post, the light flashed, and Duque revealed his unique figure. He was wearing a swordsman's uniform, holding a staff in his left hand and a sword in his right. Seeing the number 1 Archmage and Supreme Commander of the Alliance ignore his duties and steal the job of a thief, and even risk his life to infiltrate the enemy's rear, and he succeeded. Turayan could not help but feel angry. Your Excellency Commander Duke Marcus. Please conduct yourself with dignity. The entire command post echoed with Turayan's roar, which sounded like a remonstrance but was actually a curse. Duque's cheeks twitched from the scolding, and he quickly changed the topic. Let's not talk about anything else. Hurry up and get this thing done, I'm not a professional. With that, Duque threw Reki Winterfrost's miserable head to Turayan. Anyone with a little bit of evil would be able to sense that Reki's ferocious skull was surrounded by violent resentment. If it was not handled well, it would not be unusual for it to attach itself to an unlucky person and resurrect. Chapter 922. From Duque's point of view, Reki was a famous boss and frontline commander of the Burning Legion, so Turayan should treat him with caution. Who knew? Turayan angrily pulled out his sword from behind, and with a flash of golden holy light, he directly chopped off Reki's head. It was simple and violent, just like how some people on the beach like to play in summer with a baseball bat while blindfolded. He really didn't want to look at it. Turayan's anger had yet to subside. Duque. I've always respected you, even if you're younger than me, your maturity and foresight have always been a role model for me to learn from. In the 10 years that you've been missing, I've studied every single one of your battles no less than 50 times. But, at this critical moment of the world's survival, how can you be so reckless? Duque was scared stiff. Turayan immediately put Quell Zerum back into the giant's scabbard on his back, and then he strode forward. I admit that you're a rare, wise and strong person in the world, but please consider our feelings. If you're a guardian, and this is something that can be solved by a guardian, we'll just stay behind and support you. But this isn't. This is a terrifying event that requires the cooperation of every force in the world of Azeroth to resist. In order to deal with the Archherons, each of us even have to endure the nausea and become allies with those green-skinned monsters who have been fighting with us for 15 years. Turayan was so agitated that the arteries and veins on both sides of his neck swelled, as if 2 detonators were stuffed into them. I'm sorry. I didn't consider the overall situation. Duque realized that he was still slightly impulsive. Although under the system's calculations, he was definitely in danger, but he did not consider the feelings of the others in the alliance. Most of the paladins were extremely principled people. Since Duque had apologized, Turayan's anger came and went quickly, and his emotions calmed down. The Alliance will never lack brave people who charge into death and despair, but what the Alliance lacks is a wise person who can lead everyone to victory. Duque, in your personal domain, none of us will ask. But when it comes to the future of the world, please consider it carefully. Got it. Duque could only sigh. Alright, after Duque was taught a righteous lesson like a grandson, the bastard Turalian actually had the nerve to stick close to Duque and openly pretend to be sneaky. He asked with a volume that could be heard by the entire command post, "Alright, for the sake of righteousness, I have to remind you. But in private, can you tell me what you've gained from taking such a huge risk?" Duque's face was full of embarrassment. He finally understood. Turayan would have to remonstrate with him. The alliance without Duque and the alliance with Duque were not on the same level. For the sake of the future of the alliance, Turalian, as the deputy commander of the alliance, not just in name, had to warn Duque. In private, taking the head of the enemy's general amidst thousands of soldiers and horses was the ultimate dream of every martial artist. Moreover, that was an enemy of the Burning Legion. If anyone managed to do it in private, it would be enough for them to brag about it in the tavern for the rest of their lives. So on the surface, all the generals in the command post advised Duque to behave himself. But in the end, all of their eyes were full of envy, jealousy, and hatred. "You're all dirty." Duque pretended to be angry and then ordered, "Alright, in order to prevent the Alliance's warriors from making unnecessary sacrifices, start the retreat plan." For a moment, the entire command post was filled with a faint celebratory atmosphere. Why build a beachhead? Knowing the enemy's ultimate goal, why would they come to a place that was easy to attack and hard to defend instead of defending a dangerous place? Wasn't it just to test the Burning Legion's military strength and arrangements? On the other hand, if the goal was already achieved, why would they still use human lives to fill it up? That's right, in that instant, Duque had already read the information he wanted through the system elf in Reki Winterfrost's scattered consciousness after the attack. In the eyes of ordinary people, it would be a large amount of messy and useless information. However, Duque had the system elf. No matter how complicated and messy the information was, after being sorted out and summarized by the system, he could still deduce the number and composition of the Burning Legion's military strength. The Alliance troops on the beach began to retreat at high speed. The Burning Legion discovered something that drove them crazy. When they seemed to be able to catch those Alliance dwarves with their claws, it was as if a rope had pulled them. In the blink of an eye, they had already run to a distance that required magic to hit. When they were preparing their magic, those dwarves with short legs had already sat in smoking cars and ran to a place that could only be reached by long-range ordnance. When Anaron ordered the Air Force to chase after them, countless huge nets were shot out from the ground, covering all the gargoyles on the ground. When the Dreadlord pulled Ice Dragon over, everyone in the entire position had run away, leaving only landmines on the ground. That kind of resentment almost drove Anaron, the Dreadlord who was forced to command, mad. The Alliance's beach garrison, along the long-planned retreat route, ran quickly and without disorder. During the retreat, there were all kinds of traps and cover for each other, so that the losses of this group of troops could be said to be light. Duque did not retreat with the army. He followed the road that Azhara took to Grey Valley and entered the forest at high speed. He immediately noticed that Sylvanas was the first to come up to him. He almost thought that Queen Sylvanas was going to teach him a lesson like Turayan, but the next scene made him speechless. Queen Sylvanas entered, a very nonsensical acting mode. She gently covered her abdomen. "Ah! My poor little Duke, who is rumored to be a posthumous child, do you know? Your dad probably just lost his life because he went to the demons to show off, leaving us orphans and widows." Duque's facial muscles were almost out of control. Forget about pretending to be pitiful. What the hell was the legendary posthumous child? There were too many things to complain about, right? If Queen Sylvanas was not a cabbage that he had slept with, Duque would have wanted to kill her. Duque could only put his hands on his hips and said helplessly, "Well, if your man is a bureaucrat who only stays in the safety of the rear command post and gives orders to the frontline soldiers." Queen Sylvanas' face turned cold, and immediately became cold. "Humph. Who is that guy? I don't know him." All right. Was this the right kind of dictatorship and personal heroism again? Duque said helplessly, "Well, I swear I won't do this next time." Queen Sylvanas leaned over and gave Duque a warm hug. Then she blinked her sly eyes and said solemnly, "No, what I want to say is, next time you do this, please be sure to take me with you." Chapter 923. That's enough, you guys. Stop messing around. Duque was so angry this time that his nose was crooked. However, this Queen Sylvanas was the Queen Sylvanas he was familiar with. An extremely courageous heroine. From another perspective, she was also an expert at courting death in fancy ways. As her man, Duque had come to kill the general and capture the flag. Queen Sylvanas was also itching to do something. Sigh, why can't Sylvanas learn from Sasha? Wouldn't it be great if she had the attributes of a good wife? Duque rubbed his forehead and warned Queen Sylvanas, "Don't play with fire. I might succeed the first time, but I'll definitely die the second time." "Of course I understand. I'll listen to you. This isn't Eversong Forest, anyway." Alright, Duque seemed to have found the crux of the matter. If this was the homeland that Sylvanas deeply loved, then no matter what, he would resist step by step and inflict the greatest amount of damage on the Burning Legion. At this moment, in the tribe's camp at the foot of the mountain, Grom was grinding his teeth. There was no first place in literature, and no second place in martial arts. He had fought with Duque and Duque's subordinates for more than 10 years, and had even been saved by Duque. If Duque was still that despicable person who only knew how to hide in the army and play tricks, Grom obviously wouldn't care. Now that Duque had suddenly done something so exciting, Grom, the self-proclaimed #1 warrior of the tribe, really couldn't take it anymore. Humph. That kind of thing, I can also do. Grom was too old, and Thrall couldn't control him. But Thrall used his wisdom to solve this matter. "Grom, do you mean you can kill that lich, or do you mean you can run away like Duque after killing the lich?" After thinking about it for a moment, the mighty hellscream deflated. If it were him, he would have nothing to fear against Reki Winterfrost one-on-one. If he had to charge through the army at the front and kill a high-level lich, he wouldn't even have a 30% chance. Don't even think about coming back after you go. For example, a strength-type hero like him would always advance without retreat. Once he went up, he would either return with a complete victory or he would not be able to return. There was no third option. Of course, the images that Duque sent them couldn't be the slightest. It was like showing an old 640 to 480 resolution TV to outsiders, while showing your own family members the legendary 8K ultra-high-definition TV. The only thing the Horde and the Night Elves knew was that Duque had killed a Lich commander of the Burning Legion. In a sense, this was a form of protection for Duque, but it was also a form of flexing one's muscles. 2 hours later, Duque arrived at the tribal camp at the foot of the mountain. There was no welcoming or murderous hostility. Sal, Wajin and Grom just received Duque. "What is it?" asked Sal. "Nothing. I just have some information about the Burning Legion to share with you." With that said, Duque took out a bunch of figurines, or rather, monster models. The models were sculpted with hand of magic under the control of the system. This was the Azeroth version of 3D printing. Sal's pupils constricted in an instant, and his eyes were firmly attracted by the monsters that Duque took out. For example, this dog-like monster was covered in scarlet scales, with black barbs on its back and 2 huge white horns that looked like bull horns growing out of the front part of its neck. The edge of its hideous mouth, which looked a bit like a bird's beak, was full of sharp, jagged teeth. But when Sal reached out and touched the monster, a one projection that floated in midair and slowly rotated clockwise suddenly appeared. When the projection first appeared, all the orcs present were shocked. Brock almost drew his axe and was about to chop the monster. This is... Sal's attention was attracted by the orc language scroll below the projection of the monster, and he subconsciously read it out: Devil Hound, special skill, mana burn, mainly for spellcasters such as shamans. Sal immediately realized what Duque had done. This was Duque sharing information with the tribe in the simplest and most straightforward way. Perhaps it could be considered that Duque was pretending, but no one could deny that without Duque's information, the warriors of the tribe would have had to pay with their lives to test it out. For ease of reading, it was also translated into orc language, and the key skills of certain demons were marked with red circles. Most orcs were illiterate. Living in the wilderness for the first half of their lives, coupled with more than a decade of imprisonment, few orcs understood orc language. Fortunately, Sal still had some shamans who were captured when the Zul attacked Azeroth. Otherwise, he really wouldn't have enough people to explain to the warriors. Simple text explanations weren't that straightforward, but with the 3D projection, as long as the orcs weren't too stupid, they would be able to remember what kind of enemy to deal with. For Duke to do this, it was really considerate of him. Sal very straightforwardly bowed to Duque. "I thank you on behalf of the tribe. You are a true gentleman." Duque accepted Sal's bow calmly. "When it comes to dealing with the Burning Legion, our interests are the same. Moreover, I can't get the most accurate information. This is only the general situation. Please adapt to the situation on the battlefield." "We understand." As if remembering something, Sal asked again, "How long does the tribe need to last?" Duque cast a slightly melancholic gaze towards the top of the mountain. "It depends on the night elves. But when the tribe needs to retreat, the Alliance will cover you." Regarding this answer, Sal was both helpless and nervous. If they weren't forced into a corner, the tribe definitely wouldn't cooperate with the Alliance. No orc would feel comfortable thinking that their escape route was in the hands of the Alliance, their archenemy for more than a decade. Unfortunately, no one had a choice. The terrain of Mount Hyjal was very special. It was low in the west and high in the east, and the entire mountain path was S-shaped from west to east. Coupled with the super-powerful array set up by the 3 dragon aspects, even the Arch-Herons had to obediently go up the mountain from the west foot. Who asked him to be summoned to Azeroth, and his strength was halved. There was no battle that day, but not many orcs could sleep for the whole night. At the foot of the mountain, countless dazzling meteors cut through the night sky, whistling as they smashed into the Grey Valley area in the south. The Burning Legion was famous for their 3 light maniacs: steal everything, kill everything, and burn everything. Otherwise, why would so many races in the universe hate the Burning Legion? They had thought that the Burning Legion would take a shortcut from Azeroth, cross the precipice, and directly kill their way to the foot of Mount Hyjal. Otherwise, they would have to take a detour through Grey Valley and Fellwood Forest and obediently come from the front. Who would have thought that they guessed half right? Chapter 924. Every orc warrior was told that their mission this time was to save the world. Even though it sounded ridiculous, the orcs cherished this brand new territory after losing their homeland and being slaves for more than 10 years. Although it was barren, it was still much better than our world, which was shrinking every year and constantly rotting and collapsing. It was many times better than being a slave who had nothing. Upon hearing that the damned devils dared to encroach on their new territory, the orcs roared and swore to teach them a lesson. With the shaman's explanation and the magnified projection, they knew very well how powerful their enemies were and how huge their bodies were. They had also imagined that there would be an endless sea of corpses in front of them, or an army of demons with war banners covering the sky. But no one had imagined that the enemies would appear in such a situation. If the enemies didn't cross the mountain directly, they would take the normal route and pass through Mount Hyjal's Grey Valley to the south before heading to Fellwood Forest to the west. Then, they would crash into the only entrance of Mount Hyjal and the fortified camp that the orcs built over the past few days. The Burning Legion, who should have been enraged by the death of their frontline commander, didn't speed up or slow down. Instead, they reached Grey Valley at a speed of 150 kilometers per day. Even though the undead army had paid the price of marching day and night and far exceeded the limits of an ordinary army, it was still within the budget of the three main factions. Then, the Burning Legion ignored Fellwood Forest and arrived at the mountain pass of Mount Hygel. They relied on a gigantic monster that could make most of the defensive lines in this world a joke. Even from Duque's perspective as a transmigrator, this was an exaggerated and ridiculous matter. Under the image transmission of the mage's eyes, Duque saw a boss that shouldn't be here. While the tribe at the foot of the mountain was shocked by the sudden explosion, Duque had already sketched the outline of the gigantic monster with the system's assistance. Duque finally knew what Archimonde was doing in the boundless ocean. The orcs at the foot of the mountain camp were shocked by the landslide 3 kilometers away. Sar could only blankly shout, "Everyone, be on guard." At that time, Duque decisively used the backdoor that the Night Elves had left for him to activate the teleportation according to the coordinates he had set in the orc camp. In less than 10 seconds, Duque's figure appeared in the middle of the tribe's campsite. Of course, Sal noticed the light of the portal. Almost as soon as Duque's figure appeared, Sal rushed over with his guards. "Marcus. Do you know what that thing is?" "I know. A burrowing worm. Let's talk about the details later. Evacuate the center of the camp immediately. It doesn't matter even if the entire camp is evacuated." Duque shouted while waving his arms and legs. Sal's face darkened. Retreating before the battle even started was definitely an insult to the bravery of the beast men. If it was someone else, he would have used the hammer of destruction to smash that guy's face into paste. But that was Duque, the brave Duke Marcus, who had just risked his life to kill a commander of the Burning Legion the day before. Even the orcs who disliked Duque had to show respect for Duque's method of going deep into the enemy's midst and seizing the flag. Sal only hesitated for a second before blowing the horn that represented the retreat of the entire army. The order conveyed by the horn could not be completely carried out. Only the Warsong clan could carry out the order better. After more than 10 years of guerrilla life, they had thoroughly trained an elite and strong army. Slightly better was the Frostwolf clan. After all, it was Sal's father's clan. Sal had perfectly inherited the power of the old patriarch Durotan. Most of the other orcs from the other clans were slaves and seriously lacked discipline. It just so happened that this group of orcs was the most numerous. The orcs were in a mess, but the terrifying behemoth in the distance once again drilled into the ground and rushed towards the orc camp at a speed faster than a horse's gallop. It dug a hole in the ground like an earthworm. Every time it moved underground, it would cause the earth to bulge and shake. It was like a long-lasting earthquake that swept across the entire orc camp. Not many mortals could stand steadily in such a violent earthquake. From far to near, the ground bulged bit by bit. It was as if there was an invisible hand that could reach the heavens and the earth, pushing a hill towards the tribe's camp. Closer. Closer, closer. The tribal warriors had expressions of despair as they watched the moving hill with rocks tumbling outwards collide with the tribe's camp at high speed. In the next second, whether it was the Tauran warriors that weighed nearly a ton, the wooden walls made of huge logs that required 2 people to wrap their arms around them, or the tall arrow towers that were thick and sturdy, they were all knocked into the sky by this terrifying impact that was beyond the imagination of mortals. Not to mention the orc warriors that only weighed a mere 200 to 300 kilograms. From afar, those green orc warriors were no different from dolls. This was just the beginning. In the next moment, it was as if a long howl rose in everyone's heart. This sharp howl came from the dark underground world, from the distant ancient times, from the most ancient continent of Kalimdor, which was still ruled by the 4 ancient gods and the elemental lords. The violent howl pierced straight into the deepest part of everyone's heart, evoking their most primitive instinctive fear. It directly made everyone forget to breathe and forget their heartbeat. Those with slightly weaker physiques and willpower directly fainted because their hearts were too nervous and suddenly contracted. At this moment, the center of the entire tribe's camp exploded. Like a volcanic eruption, countless sand directly exploded from the bottom to the top. Many unlucky people who had just been knocked flying had just begun to fall from the sky, but were once again knocked into the sky by the terrifying impact. And among this group of pitiful people, there was impressively the group of priests that Duque had specially provided for the orcs. Coincidentally, the young priest, Sally Matewain, was also among them. As a priest, she had, Holy Word, Shield, a rather practical life-saving skill that was not considered heaven-defying but rather practical. As a talented priest, the moment Sally was knocked flying, she cast a Holy Word, Shield on herself that was flickering with a faint white light. The milky white light shield resisted the flying rocks very well. She even cast a levitation on herself to avoid falling to her death from a high altitude. However, in the next moment, she fell into the deepest depths of fear and despair. Because below her, the tribe's camp that was originally filled with various defensive structures had disappeared. What replaced it was a huge mouth with at least 10,000 sharp fangs that stretched out from the deep black hole. She was slowly falling into the mouth that was enough to swallow a small town. You're tuning into the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.